Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Ті, хто води всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів. Робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить. Хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар? Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ. Тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 819 of the news. And it's good to see you all once again. And Russia is losing yet again, and also they are cowering down to NATO. And it's good to see you all.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine, because we have some really interesting things to cover. The Russians have practically lost every major offensive at this point that is going on in Ukraine, and very clear evidence has come out today of exceedingly high Russian losses with absolutely no frontline movement forward, meaning that these offensives are pretty much the way of the dodo. It's just really about waiting for the Russians' willpower to end, or for Russian supplies to be fully burned out before those offensives all come to a grinding halt, including the one in the Kharkiv Oblast, which is literally just completely petered out at this point, and we'll get into that analysis a little bit further a little bit later on, because I was about to get into it right there. But we also have major news. As many of y'all know, one of the last times we were on air, which was yesterday, we heard that the Russian Federation was going to unilaterally expand their maritime borders in the Gulf of Finland into NATO waters with Estonia and Finland, and it was of course going to cause some massive problems. Well, it turns out that several NATO countries ended up bucking that last night so badly. The Russians have actually cowered down to NATO and have ended up rescinding the unilateral maritime border change that they were about to implement, which sounds like a very big victory diplomatically for NATO. We're going to be moving on into all of this news tonight, a load of it, because there is actually lots of things that happen. And also, just as a side note, there was also a spotting of an unidentified flying object over Russia. We don't know what it is, although it kind of looks like a missile, and we will be looking at that here in a moment as well, and trying to see what all of y'all think about it and what that might be. But moving on up into the area of St. Petersburg, or specifically the Gulf of Finland, there has been some very interesting news that has come out of the Gulf of Finland as of the past 48 hours. Just like I was telling you all a moment ago, we have heard that apparently Russia was becoming a little bit more aggressive as they started to try and change the borders, the maritime borders in between Estonia and Finland just the other day. This is something that would have been a very provocative measure by the Russian Federation, as it would be violating previous or prior maritime treaties and would be encroaching on NATO territorial waters that had been agreed upon bilaterally. This would have been a major provocation, considering that maritime borders are as serious as actual land borders in most cases, and this most likely would have led to a confrontation with NATO in the future, or would have been used to try and get some sort of diplomatic concessions by the NATO alliance to the Russian Federation. That was what happened just 24 hours ago. And what's very interesting about that is that the Russians have already backed down. Multiple NATO countries, including Estonia and Finland, which were the two countries that were going to be affected by this maritime border change, bucked this so badly and already started making such a diplomatic showdown about this. The Russians backed off immediately. And we have now heard that the Russian decree to change the maritime borders has been removed. A draft decree suggesting changing Russia's borders in the Baltic Seas was deleted from the Russian government website on May 22nd, which is today, after swift condemnation from some NATO members. Meaning that NATO won, because for the large part, Russia was about to implement this unilaterally. And this means that while NATO wouldn't have respected this change or have agreed on it, the Russians would have started to enforce these false maritime borders like they had it. And this is something that I gotta say is a massive change and a hugely beneficial one for NATO, because it is showing that the Russians are actually scared of possible confrontation directly with NATO, even on just the diplomatic exchange phase, before we even get into a more so a conflict phase. This is huge news, and it does seem as though that the Russians are very scared of dealing with a direct confrontation of NATO, which leads us to kind of have to revisit what is going on down in the area of Belarus and Kaliningrad, as the buildup of Russian forces in this area may not be offensive in nature. It may actually just be that they've moved a larger amount of forces into the area, because based on their actions in the Gulf of Finland, it does appear that they are incredibly scared of direct confrontation with NATO, and for that reason, I would assume that the Russians' bark has absolutely no bite, including the tactical nuclear drills, because everything that they do, once it actually gets towards getting into an action phase, it completely falls flat on its face. But with that, moving on from that big news and on down into the area of south of Moscow and near to Voronezh, where we put this marker, we were able to see a sort of an interesting unidentified flying object over Russia. We don't know what this is. It could be a meteor, it could be a missile, it could be an aircraft of some sort, although we don't know what kind of aircraft this would be. But nevertheless, we can see it flying up there, and we have absolutely no idea what this thing is.
It's the ghost of Kyiv. He's back again. He's also a shooting star.
Dude, that's what someone looks like after a night at Taco Bell. But with that,
oh man,
that's the end of that clip right there. But still, what do y'all think that is in the chat? Do y'all think that is some kind of an odd aircraft? Do y'all think it's a comet? What do y'all think it is? Because it is projecting an incredibly large, pretty much fire trail behind it. We really have no clue what it is on this channel. So anyone's opinion could be an honest one at this point. Someone said Superman. Davis Campbell said Superman. Might be. JSM said Baba Yaga. Maybe. We have no idea. But it's still something interesting to talk about. But moving on from that, we do have to talk about something that I didn't really get a lot of video and picture evidence of today, but is something that we started to note a little bit more on our Twitter page, which you can find in the link in the description below. We have started to hear that Russia is starting to move larger amounts of equipment to Ukraine's northern region, specifically around the Sumy Oblast as well as around the Chernihiv Oblast inside the Russian Federation. And a lot of people are wondering if a major Russian attack is imminent. While we're seeing a large movement of vehicles, one thing that I was able to note is that it doesn't appear that there was a large amount of armor that was present in these movements, showing that this may entirely be light forces, light infantry forces that are being moved into the area of the Sumy Oblast and the Chernihiv Oblast, possibly to try and make the Ukrainians fearful that there would be an offensive, but at the same time also not having the ability to actually follow through with that. We are not entirely sure on that, but we will be trying to see what is going on with that in the future. At the moment, it's a little bit too close to tell, or really too early to tell, what the Russian Federation would really be wanting to do with these actions and movements of forces within the area of Kursk and Bryansk Oblast towards the direction of the Sumy and Chernihiv border. But still, a lot of y'all have weighed in on this, and a lot of y'all have many different opinions. Some people think that this might be a large-scale attack, a large offensive that the Russians are planning back into the northern area of Ukraine. Some people say that it's more so probably Kharkiv replenishments that are beginning to move into this area, and then will eventually be shifted down into the area of Belgorod. Some other people are saying it seems like it, but they'll need more info, and some other people are completely unsure. But a lot of people have really weighed in a load on this. Loads of y'all already have, and we've only asked y'all this question for just a short time. But Matthew, what are people saying about this massive Russian movement within the Kursk and Bryansk area, and what do they think it's going to lead to, and what do you think it's going to lead to as well?
All right, so now that we've seen video evidence that Russia is indeed moving very large amounts of equipment into Ukraine's northern region, the question is a major attack imminent? 60% said yes, Russia is planning a major attack. 18% said it seems so, but I really need more info. And 15% said no, it's simply Kharkiv replenishments. So it looks like the majority of people believe that Russia is indeed planning another large attack. And on that front, based on what we're seeing in the videos, I would have to say I'm also leaning that direction as well. It looks like they're planning on doing another major attack, maybe near the Sumy direction, based on what we're seeing on the map. But then again, simply speculation at the moment, but we are seeing tons of equipment being moved by train from Russia into that area. So certainly concerning, but the Ukrainians are also seeing this as well, and I'm sure they're taking measures to get ready for that. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that in my opinion, I think that this is most likely some sort of a ruse that is being conducted by the Russian Federation. It would seem as though that a large attack is happening, but in my honest opinion, I just don't think that they could conduct another major offensive with the ones that they have going on right now. There are loads of things that have been happening not only in the Kharkiv Oblast, but also in the occupied regions of Ukraine, in Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, that are clearly showing us that they probably do not have a lot of an ability to follow through with another major offensive in a completely different area. We've already seen that while Russian logistics have somehow been able to hang on down in the area of occupied Ukraine, up in the area of Kharkiv, it seems as though logistics may be entirely absent. While there is a large amount of artillery support, it doesn't seem that there's a large amount of support or supplies for the actual frontline fighting forces of the Russian Federation that are attempting to advance onwards and outwards from the border region and deeper on into the Kharkiv Oblast. This is starting to show that there is a marked lack of logistical abilities of the Russian armed forces at this point, and it seems as though they may have been completely stretched. Not only that, but we've also noticed that the amount of armored vehicles such as tanks in the Kharkiv offensive seem to be lighter than normal. We have seen several that have been destroyed, but overall, in picture and video evidence, it seems like most of this offensive in the Kharkiv Oblast is mostly made up of light infantry supported by maybe some APCs and a very limited number of tanks, which may also be showing once again that in available armor numbers, the Russians are getting exhausted and depleted just in the southern areas of Ukraine alone. This means that if they were to try and start another offensive based off of everything that we've been seeing, based off of the picture and video evidence, and all of the information and statistics that we've been able to compile in the background, a new offensive in a new area would most likely be one of the most underwhelming and unsuccessful offensives that we've seen of the war at this date, because of the following. They will probably not have any armor at all in that offensive. If any, it will probably be a small amount of armored personnel carriers. Most of their forces will be infantry, lightly equipped infantry at that, maybe even with a lack of anti-tank guided missile systems, which would really pose a very tough time for them to try and conduct any sizable or meaningful offensive, especially if the Ukrainians started to move armored forces into the area to counter the Russian advance. So going off of that, I would highly assume that a Russian offensive at this point in a new area would be unlikely. This is most likely a ruse to make the Ukrainians believe that there would be an offensive going forward, although they lack the necessary equipment or abilities to be able to conduct another offensive while the rest of them are ongoing. And this may be an attempt once again to draw Ukrainian forces away from the southeastern region of Ukraine, specifically within the area of the Donetsk Oblast, and move those forces further north towards Sumy and Chernihiv on the completely opposite end of the country, so that if any breakthroughs are made in southern Ukraine by Russian forces due to the depleted Ukrainian force composition in this area, the Ukrainian forces would not be able to move as rapidly or respond as quickly in that area, because they would be literally on the other side of the country. So in my opinion, I have a feeling it's a ruse, but who knows for sure. We'll have to wait and see. This could be an actual attempt by the Russians to conduct an offensive. I believe that it's not out of the question that they would try and conduct an offensive, even with this abysmal picture that has been created. But the thing about that, though, is that if they do conduct an offensive like this, it would practically be suicidal for the forces on the ground, and they would incur incredibly high losses and probably make even less gains than we've seen in the area around Kharkiv. But that would be my opinion on the force movements in this area, and still, we'll just kind of have to keep an eye on that and see what it turns into. But moving on from that, we have also been able to hear, and I'll cover this really quickly. We didn't put down a news bulletin for this, but in the United States Congress today, we did hear that some members were speaking about possibly allowing the United States to give permission to Ukraine for the Ukrainians to use American weapons on Russian soil. I very rarely ever pay attention to U.S. politics to make sure that we remain as politically unbiased on this channel as possible and do not weigh in on it, but I am starting to see that there's apparently several representatives and maybe even senators that are beginning to directly request, really bilaterally on both sides, for American weapons to be allowed to be used inside the Russian Federation. It appears that the argument at the moment on this is that the Russians are firing most of their longer range weapon systems, such as intermediate range ballistic missiles like the Iskander, from the area of Kursk, Bryansk, Belgorod, Voronezh Oblast, as well as Rostov-on-Don and Krasnodar. Because of this, the Ukrainians are very rarely able to return fire or conduct what we would call counter-battery fire on these positions that are launching these intermediate-range ballistic missiles. For that reason, some U.S. representatives and senators are requesting that U.S. weapons are allowed to be fired into the territory of the Russian Federation in a limited arc, specifically within the area of the border oblasts, to be able to fire back at these missile launchers and destroy them. The only reason I'm covering this is that it appears that there is some serious talk being made about this. I'm not going to weigh in on who's making those statements or whether I agree or disagree with those people's political stances individually, but one thing I will say about this is that that is a very interesting statement, and as on the statement's merits alone, I would believe that that would probably be a pretty prudent change to make, considering that the Russian Federation, really the last thing that they have at the moment to try and strike at Ukraine is their long-range missile forces that have been firing from the Navy, which now the Navy hardly can do that unless if they were to use their very expensive and rare Kilo-class submarines, or from the air forces or the ground forces that have been firing from inside of Russia. If the Ukrainians can counter those or actually conduct a successful counter-battery fire, we could see that even the Russians' last-ditch effort to actually strike at the Ukrainians and cause serious damage may be all but wiped wiped out, which would be very nice to see, and something that we'll be keeping an eye on, keeping y'all updated on if the United States makes an official change on that moment. If they do make a change on that, we will know, and y'all will know, because you will probably see a letter or a statement made by the Department of State or the Department of Defense on that matter. That's when we'll know that it's finally gone all the way through really just a discussion phase and has moved into being the actual here's what's going to happen sort of a phase. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And before we even get on into the rest of what's happening in Ukraine, because we actually have some really, really cool stuff that's happening in Ukraine, not even on the front lines, but we have seen that apparently the West may want the Russians to collapse like the United Soviet Socialist Republics did in 1991. And a lot of people have been talking about this and what the West's aim may be with the Russian Federation, because a lot of people have been noting that the war seems to have gone on for quite some time. Maybe even a little bit longer than it really could have, even at this point. And this may be an attempt by the West to whittle down the Russian Federation and cause them to go into a complete economic and political collapse, meaning that not only would the government be completely destroyed, but the Russian economy would also be destroyed as well, pretty much making sure that the Russians would be down and out for the count for the next several decades, much like they were after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And in fact, they may not recover from this position. The Soviet Union was a fairly large economic power when it collapsed, even though it had been in economic stagnation and an economic backslide since the 1970s at that point, which means for about 20 years or so. While that is the case, the Russian Federation now is hardly a shell of its former self in Soviet times. The economy never truly recovered, and while it did stabilize after the collapse that occurred after 1991 and really up until about 1995 and 1996, it seems as though the Russian economy is an incredibly fragile one, and it is also a monolithic economy, really relying on only one product, which is oil and petroleum resources. And so going off of that, it may be entirely possible that if the United States economically collapsed the Russians a second time, or really if the West, the collective West did that, the Russians would never rebound from this and would pretty much disappear as even a minor regional power within the area, which may also open up the path for denuclearization due to the Russians' lack or inability to even afford to maintain the nuclear arsenal that they have. A lot of people have been weighing in on this and talking about this. And Matthew, what are people thinking about this, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right, so this question right here is a question that me and also someone else on Twitter were having a pretty good conversation about earlier today, and we figured let's ask the entire audience what they think about it. And once again, the question is, does the West really want Russia to have a total collapse like the USSR did in 1991? And it looks like 52% of the people said yes, the West wants Russia to actually collapse. And 35% said no, the West wants a stable Russia, and 8% said it seems so, but not really. And in my opinion, I'm with actually the 35%. I think in reality, the West wants a stable Russia for a couple of different reasons. First of all, they don't want a total collapse because that could mean really changing the geopolitics in the area between China and also Russia. And I don't think the U.S. is really ready for that, to be perfectly honest. And also the fact that the U.S. will not let Ukraine strike Russia with weapons, I think that's another indicator that something's not quite right with the West wanting Russia to collapse. So to me in general, I would say that we want a weakened Russia, but we don't want a collapsed Russia. That's the current position of the West right now. And me personally, I'm not sure if that's a good strategy. I think maybe we should probably go all in on Russia. And if they collapse again like they did in 1991, it simply happens. That's my take on it. But of course, that's just an opinion. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that in my opinion, we probably do want to see that the Russian Federation would collapse. And that is a little bit of a weird one because a government collapse on Russia's scale would probably end up being quite severe. Not really because of the fact that their economy is large or their population is large or anything, because by most metrics, Russia is actually a fairly small country, both economically as well as population-wise. And let me see if I can get you all that. Russia rankings. And let me see here if we can get that. So let's see here. What is Russia in the world? On the Prosperity Index, Russia is ranked 77th, but that seems a little bit ambiguous. So let me get Russia population rank, so that way I can get you all that. Russia is the 9th largest country in the world population-wise, with 144 million people living inside the Russian Federation. The economic ranking, or the GDP ranking, let me get that really quickly. The GDP of the Russian Federation is, according to 2020, well, 2021 is not around anymore. They have tanked. So let's see. The Russian GDP is the 12th largest in the world. So you can kind of get the idea that they are largely much smaller than most other countries, especially other Western countries. The Germans economically beat out the Russians day and night at this point, with margins that truly are actually unbelievable. I believe the German GDP is somewhere around the 5 trillion mark, while the Russians are at 1.7 trillion. Or to put that into perspective for our American viewers, like myself, the GDP of the Russian Federation is equivalent to the GDP of the state of Texas only, not including the rest of the United States. That's how poor the Russian Federation is, or at least how bad off they really are. And not only that, as far as their population goes, their population compared to many other countries is largely small, or it is incredibly weirdly dispersed, with about 10% of their population living in Moscow. It could be argued that most of the country is practically underdeveloped, and considering that the Russians hardly put any funding or budgeting into the rest of the Russian Federation, I would say that it's highly likely possible that the Russians in an actual conflict would start to, well, a large conflict would start to show that they are incredibly underdeveloped. Not only that, considering that they're undeveloped, the actual impact on the world would be quite limited from a complete collapse, much like it was during Soviet times. It really just turned into brawlhalla in the former Soviet Union, but for everyone else, life largely went on as normal. In fact, things were actually better after the Soviet Union collapsed than they were before. So in my opinion, I think we probably would want to see the Russian Federation collapse. There are a couple of things that are pluses and minuses with the Russians collapsing. For example, if the government of the Russian Federation was to collapse, there would be a power vacuum, and who knows who would get in control of the Russian government later and would be in control of the nuclear weapons of the Russian Federation. But the plus side of that kind of a government upheaval is that the United States could stick its finger into the pie and begin to try and mess with the mix a little bit and try and get the person to lead Russia that they would want to lead. Or really the Western world could get whoever they want to lead as a collective. That would be another positive. On top of that, with the collapse of the Russian Federation, that means that there is no more support for the Chinese. The Russians are really the resource bulk for the People's Republic of China at this point, providing them with invaluable timber and oil reserves. And so for that reason, I think that if they were deprived of those invaluable timber and oil reserves as well as steel reserves, the People's Republic of China's economic growth would probably be even farther stagnated, and we would probably see that they would, much like the former Soviet Union, would start to go into a slight economic backslide, which would once again massively benefit us within the area of East Asia, as we will be able to continue with our plan of Chinese containment with our really island perimeter that surrounds the Chinese, or at least that's the plan at this point. And we will be able to make sure that the Western sphere stays on top of things instead of possibly having an actual rival or creating a multipolar situation worldwide. So with that, I hope that does.
So you think you'll be better if Russia collapses? Is that what you were saying?
I would say yes. I think it would be better for the Russian Federation to collapse.
Now on that, I'm not saying you're wrong necessarily. I might agree with it. The only catch is with Russia, though, since they do have nuclear weapons, and if, for example, if Russia collapsed, I assume that Putin would be ousted, either assassinated, executed, or either ousted and put out of the country some way or the other. The only question is, who's going to come up behind him and take over the nuclear weapons? Unless the West has a plan in place ready to go to basically put a Western-aligned person in the place to actually take power, then it could be pretty risky considering that they do have a nuclear-armed country.
That is true, and that was something I was just talking about a moment ago, is that there is a decent risk with that. But at the same time, if there are multiple groups or factions jockeying for power, it's entirely possible that the CIA could get involved and begin to swing things a certain direction, if you get what I mean, where there's a very amenable leader that becomes the front for the Russian Federation, is the way I'm looking at it. So there is a minus to that. There is a lot of unpredictability that could come out of a Russian governmental or economic collapse, but at the same time, there's also a decent amount of potential that could be had there for the United States, or really the entirety of the West, to be able to try and change things in Russia and remove them from the Chinese sphere, or really just remove them out of the game entirely, creating a minor power out of them at the end.
Yeah, I think honestly, I think I'm sort of leaning your direction on this whole topic, because there's no way that Putin is going to be ousted without the entire country collapsing. I think that's pretty much a foregone conclusion at this point. Putin has sheltered himself so closely in the government of Russia that unless he's assassinated, and that's really hard to do because nobody can get close to him, unless the country collapses, it's not going to end. And that means the war in Ukraine is not going to end either. And Russia's going to be an out of control rogue nation until the country just completely collapses. And the problem is the West is not really moving toward the direction of trying to collapse Russia because they're doing this like trickle down method with the aid. They're not sending it all at once. They're sending bits and pieces at a time. Until recently, they're kind of sending it a little bit faster now, but they keep sending just bits and pieces at a time to give Ukraine what they need to hold Russia off and to weaken Russia, which has been our goal so far, but not necessarily to collapse Russia all the way. And we won't even let Ukraine use our weapons to strike inside of Russia, which would accelerate the collapse even further. So I think the West just isn't ready for it, or they don't have the balls to like take that step.
Maybe so. I mean, that might actually be true. And another thing that would be interesting with the Russian government collapse, and this is something I think I didn't really cover much, and this is a really big positive. I think it's a bit of an abstract one, but it does have a historical backing. If the Russians were to governmentally collapse, we would probably be able to assume that an economic collapse would be not that long to follow. We would probably see that because of the governmental and economic collapse, the Russian Federation would not be able to support even the armed forces that they currently have right now, which is mostly Soviet vintage. And for that reason, the nuclear arsenal would once again be at the chopping block. And let me see if I can show this really quickly. Let's see, Russian nuclear stockpiles. Let's see, stockpiles 1991 to present. And let me see if I can get y'all a graph on this, because it's a very interesting thing to look at. And let's see here. Let me go get the graph. So, this is... one second. I want to make sure... Let's see, Russia high estimate and low estimate. Okay, so this is to show y'all, as best as I possibly can, what happened. Dang, let me go get a better graph. Let me try and get this one. Here we go. This is the change that was made once the collapse of the Soviet Union happened. And let me see here. The United States is right there. Russia is the one in red. At least that's what they're saying. And these numbers are these numbers are actually off because the United States historically always had less nuclear weapons. So let me see if I could get an actual good graph. All right, so we're going to go with this.
Bless you.
Thank you. We're going to go with the Federation of American Scientists because they sound a little legit. So this is the estimated number of nuclear weapons that existed in between the Russian Federation once the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991 and the United States. I want y'all to notice that in between the times of 1991 up until 2001 was the highest decline in Russian nuclear weapons that had been seen in history. Up until that point, the Soviet nuclear stockpile was growing by the thousands every single year. It was what the Soviet government invested a lot of money into. And so when the Russian Federation collapsed, so with it went the economy. And with the economy collapsing, the Russian Federation did not have the kind of money that would be needed to be able to maintain the tens of thousands of nuclear weapons that they had at their disposal. And for that reason, they actually ended up entering nuclear non-proliferation treaties with the United States and also nuclear arms reduction treaties that started to heavily reduce the amount of nuclear weapons that they had. And the entire reason they did that is simply because they couldn't afford them. They would have kept them if they could, but the fact of the matter is if they tried to, they would have either gone bankrupt or some of them would have gone missing, and who in the world knows where they would go missing, maybe even into the hands of enemies of Russia, which would be a serious concern for the Russians, and for that reason, they began to denuclearize an incredibly large amount. And the United States, in turn, considering that they had an invested interest in making sure to act with good faith towards the Russians to get them to denuclearize, we ended up denuclearizing a large amount as well, although it's not as much as on this graph. But beyond that, that is something that we will have to consider again, is that Russian nuclear weapon numbers are the lowest that they've ever been historically. No other time in history have they decreased to this level. And if the Russians were to collapse economically and politically again, the economy would be in such a bad state at this point, it would actually be the smallest it's ever been in history, that we would be able to probably step in and denuclearize them to the point that they have about the same nuclear weapons as France or the United Kingdom, which is a far more, I guess you could say, amicable sort of a number, or an amicable sort of a situation for the West to face. So what do you think of that, Matthew? Because that is something that I actually did not bring up until that point.
And also, by the way, recap that real quick, just a brief sentence of what you were saying, because I was trying to write another poll.
Oh, got you. Denuclearization, Russian economy collapses. We can go in and get rid of nuclear weapons that they have because they can't afford to even upkeep them.
I mean, it's a good theory, but I don't think that Russia or whoever comes up behind them is ever going to agree to that. Because look, for example, with Ukraine, like you said, I think you mentioned it a minute ago. Ukraine decided to give their nuclear weapons, and they were offered security guarantees. That didn't work out that well because now the security guarantees are kind of being sort of waffled on a little bit. We're supporting Ukraine, but we're not going all the way and basically like guaranteeing their security because right now nothing's guaranteed. It could go either way, especially if America starts faltering on the aid again. It could go a bad way. So, I mean, they probably would never agree to that, but it'd be worth a try.
I think it would really be worth a try. Historically, it looks like it worked before when the Soviet Union collapsed, but who knows if it will work a second time. But with that, I hope I addressed that at least the best I could in my opinion with alright analysis, hopefully good enough. Let me know if it was good enough for you all in the chat, our analysis of the idea of the Russians collapsing, or if the West would want them to collapse and what may come out of that. But moving on from that, and out of the area of Russia, because that's all the Russian news that we have, it's time for us to move on into the area of Ukraine. And we've actually gotten a decent amount of news out of Ukraine, and especially the front lines as well. Moving on into our location unknowns, we were able to see a little bit of drone-on-drone action today, as a Ukrainian drone ended up actually taking down a Russian drone carrying a bomb. And we can see the Russian drone right there circled in red, as the Ukrainian drone is now lining up to take it out. And it's coming right up on it. It ends up colliding with the drone and the bomb, taking it out mid-air, so that way it cannot be used against the Ukrainian forces on the ground. An absolutely sick interception, and beautiful to see that the Ukrainians are using their drones even as anti-drone defense for the most part. Moving on from that and on into our next clip, we also got to see an incredibly rare BMR-64 with an anti-drone cage. This is actually not a main battle tank. It is based off of the T-64, but it actually is an engineering vehicle. And it looks like the Ukrainians put a chain link fence around the turret. Probably one of the more simple cope cages that I've ever seen, but still pretty interesting to look at. And we can also see that this thing is getting absolutely no traction on this road. I mean, look at that wheel spin right here. I mean, dang.
Hey, wait a minute. This thing doesn't have those rubber road pads on it, does it?
No, this is all steel, my son. Like, they are ripping the roads.
Damn, they're ripping it up. Trying to do a burnout.
Man, burn it up, Terry. Put it in reverse, Terry. But moving on from that, we also got to see a couple of Ukrainian Mi-24s conducting some fire and maneuvers. Now we can see here the Mi-24s coming on in, tilting up, firing off their rockets, most likely S-8s. We can now see them popping off their flares and now ducking for the hills. And we now see the cameraman panning back around as the second helicopter fires off its rockets and then begins popping off its flares as well, and then braking for the trees, or really the hills more so, because there are hills off in the distance a little bit from this video. And with that, that's the end of the clip, but really nice to see that these Mi-24s were doing their thing and hopefully doing it effectively or incredibly well. Moving on from that, we also got to see the Russian casualty report over the past 24 hours. And it appears, good googly boogly, that thing is juicy. Man.
Now, I gotta say, how did the Ukrainians end up with such a round number, like 1,300, like that? Like, are they trying to, like, appease OCD in people or something, or what? But also, 5 Bobcats? It's just crazy, man. It's crazy.
Man, I'm telling you, 5 Bobcats, you can't beat that. I mean, 1,300 troops, you might be able to beat that, but 5 Bobcats, like 5 Bobcats, though, that's something. But getting in all seriousness into the casualty report, we were able to hear that 1,300 Russian soldiers were wounded and killed over the past 24 hours, along with 22 armored personnel carriers being destroyed, 59 supply trucks being burned out, 6 main battle tanks also knocked out as well, along with 41 artillery pieces, 56 drones, 1 cruise missile, 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, and the 5 special equipment vehicles. overall, things are looking incredibly well, and it looks as though that things are on the up and up for the Ukrainian defenders. They are once again inflicting record high casualties on a daily basis at this point against the Russian Federation, and it does appear that the offensive in Kharkiv is completely stalled and may even be going in reverse, maybe even being pushed out of the region. We also were able to hear that Ukrainian forces were able to push forward into the village of Ochrytine today, which is a massive change considering that Avdiivka is one of the most populous and one of the most active front lines right now in the entirety of the front line, meaning that the Ukrainians are now making counteroffensive momentum in that area, and although small, they are going up against one of the largest and strongest Russian forces within the entirety of the front, or really within the entirety of the war. So moving on from that casualty report, it's now time for us to actually get on into the blistering losses and defeats that the Russians have faced on the battlefield today in most offensives. But before we get into that, a lot of people have been talking about that big question that started to been brought up in some circles, particularly inside of the United States Congress, as some folks are starting to talk about the possible use of U.S. weapons on Russian soil against Russian targets inside of Russia. And I gotta make that incredibly clear. This is not the use of American weapons against the Russian Federation. This is the use of American weapons on Russian soil, which are two very different things. But a lot of people have been talking about this, and a lot of people have been wondering, should that be allowed? Should U.S. weapons be the next weapons that Ukraine uses on Russian forces that are inside of Russia? And a lot of people are actually thinking that that should be the case and that the Ukrainians should be allowed to strike the Russians inside of Russia. Some people are saying that it really depends on the target, and others are saying that it would escalate it a little bit too much, and some others are a little undecided. But to be quite honest, this is probably one of the most unanimous questions that I've ever seen. A lot of y'all are on the same page about this. But Matthew, what are people thinking, and what are you thinking about it as well?
So it looks like a whopping 83% said yes, the U.S. should allow Ukraine to strike Russia with U.S. weapons. And it looks like 10% said, it depends on the targets. And only 4% said, no, that would escalate too much. And on the escalation front, I would say not too much to worry about that because the UK has already done this and taken this step, and Russia has done nothing to Britain except threaten them like they do already pretty much everybody. But on this one, I would honestly be with a 10%. I would say it depends on the targets because for one thing, one argument that's used by some U.S. officials not to give Ukraine the ability to use weapons in Russian territory that are of U.S. origin is that they may end up striking something like, for example, a government building or something more important that could end up causing Russia to start World War III. And that's a fallacy right there because the U.S. can put conditions even further on the use of the weapons. For example, they can tell Ukraine you can use U.S. weapons inside of Russia, but to only strike these targets, for example, military targets, and that's it. They can obviously put those conditions on it. And the U.S. is pretending like, unless we give a blanket statement saying that they can hit everything, then we can't allow it. That's not the case. So, in my opinion, I'm with the 10%. It simply depends on the targets. And if the targets are reasonable, then I say go ahead and let them do it. That shouldn't even be a question, really. But, Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that I believe that they should be able to strike targets in Russia, but I also have to agree with Matthew. It really depends on the target. If the Ukrainians were just using it for general bombardments, I'm not really a big fan of that. I would believe that we need to make sure that these weapons would be used against known Russian command posts or supply hubs, so that way we can make sure that their use is within the United States' ideas of what is civil and the rules of engagement. And I know a lot of people are going to be saying, oh, the rules of war, because a lot of people say that, especially when it pertains to talking about the other side. But to be entirely honest, if the United States is going to provide weapons to Ukraine and allow them to be used on Russian soil, we need to have a lot of say-so and know-how on how those weapons will end up being used inside of Russia. I would not like to see in a circumstance, let's say, that a U.S.-made ATACMS missile ends up being launched and hitting into the center of Kursk, possibly hitting an apartment building. That is something that I wouldn't be a big fan of seeing, and that certainly would not be a good look for the United States. And I think that a lot of people in America would kind of disagree with the weapon being used that way, potentially. I'm not saying that it would be used that way. I'm just saying that, if we just say free willy, who knows what will happen. And so going off of that, I would say that we should give them permission to strike Russian targets inside of Russia as long as the United States gets almost like immediate notice within an hour of the planned launch or attack of what the target is, where the target is, and what the possible collateral will be, and give the United States the ability to green light or red flag that possible attack. So that way we can make sure that U.S. weapons are used as effectively as possible. But with that, I hope that
I just don't know why. I don't know why the U.S. hasn't approached it from this angle before, because, like I said, I don't think the West really wants to collapse Russia. And if U.S. weapons were allowed to be used on Russian territory to even strike the military targets, I think that would speed up the demise of Russia to the point where the U.S. is worried that it might actually collapse. And that's probably the real reason why we're seeing that is not being taken just yet, that action right there. Because, of course, it could put more conditions on the use of the weapons, like we just mentioned, but they haven't even brought that up as an option. In fact, I haven't even heard Zelensky bring that up as an option. And they really should, because that really takes away the defense the U.S. is using not to give them permission to do so.
And I would have to say, that is a good point. I haven't really heard anyone bring that up. And on top of that, we have seen that the United States has wanted Ukraine's actions to be somewhat reserved against the Russians. Like, for example, really kind of chastising them for attacking Russian oil refineries, which has been interesting, possibly showing that Matthew's completely right. The U.S. government is scared of what a Russian collapse could bring. And so that's why we keep on seeing that what America allows or what America supports as a response to the Russians is always a little bit more reserved than what we would want. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And with that, it's time for us to actually move on into those front lines, and there is a lot that's going on. But before we get into it, there are a couple of questions that I want to make sure to answer. And so, Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so our first one of the night goes to Toadman the First, who threw in a very generous, whopping $100 donation to support the channel.
Dang!
Huge shout out, Toadman, for that support. And his question is, he says, do donations also help Ukraine by sending it through your channel? And what I mean by it is, does some of the profit go to Ukraine from the super chats? And anyways, I will continue to help support your hard work, and I love all the detailed information that you give to the viewers.
And I thank you so much for the massive support, Toadman the First, in helping this channel to keep on running. And to answer your question, that is the answer right there. That's why we say that on every single super chat, is that super chats help this channel to keep on running. This channel does not run, well, actually the channel does run for free because we don't run ads or sponsors on our live streams. And so this live stream is completely free. We don't make a cent running it just naturally from ads or sponsors or say anything like that. The only way that we are able to do this as a living on our end behind the scenes is through folks like you, Toadman the First, who decide to throw in a super chat and support this channel. As far as support going to Ukraine out of that, I pretty much have to say none of it goes to Ukraine, but that is a little bit of a misnomer because every single Sunday I throw in at least $100 into our Sunday night fundraiser to help out with supporting that nonprofit. We have donated $1.4 million to charity though through the Sunday night fundraisers, and that's how the monetization on this channel works. Y'all get to decide where the money goes. We are not a kind of channel that takes things into a big pot, like, you know, where I say give all of the money to me and then I'll give some of it to Ukraine, because then y'all have to ask the question, how much of that is going to Ukraine and how much of that is going to me? On this channel, we decided to completely remove that question and just go with the concept of, if you send in a super chat, just assume all of that support is going towards us behind the scenes and helping us to be able to do this as a job and keep this channel running and do everything else in the meantime. On the other hand, though, if you want to support Ukraine through this channel, we have Sunday night fundraisers, which all of that goes directly to Ukraine. And there's really no way that it doesn't go to Ukraine because we only run our fundraisers through YouTube Give, which is a built-in YouTube system that allows us to select a registered nonprofit that has been approved by the GuideStar system, which background checks the fundraisers heavily, and also YouTube has to sign off on the specific nonprofit that we're fundraising for as well, which creates two separate steps of verification to make sure that the nonprofit's legit. YouTube then sets up the bank account. They then receive all of the donations that y'all give, deduct nothing from it, meaning not a cent. They don't deduct anything for transaction fees, accounting fees, or anything in between. And then they send all of that money directly from that account that's made and straight to that nonprofit. So say like last weekend, well, this last Sunday, it was a fundraiser run for Nova Ukraine, which is the first time that we ever ran a fundraiser for Nova Ukraine. I believe that we raised like $5,700 on that, if I remember correctly.
It was a lot.
It was a load. And that $5,700 is held by YouTube. We can't touch a dime of it. And if you ever want to look into the YouTube give system, you can Google it and look into it for yourself, because it is incredibly thorough with what they do and how well it's protected and how transparent it is. You'll even see the number publicly while it's being raised, and it's actually baked into the YouTube system. But once all of the money is put into that account by the viewers on that fundraiser over a given period, which we run from the beginning of that stream to the end of it, or really till midnight local time on our end, then after a while, the bank account is closed, YouTube does all of the accounting, and the money is sent straight to that nonprofit. And then that nonprofit uses it out in the field for whatever they're going to end up using it for. So that's how we run things on this channel. And I want to make sure that we make that
And also, by the way, on our merch as well, like we haven't released merch for a minute now. We're still waiting on some samples to come in. But every time we release new merch on our store, a portion of the profits go to charity as well. Specifically, United 24. That's the one we chose for the merch store. So even from that, we're donating to charity.
And that is true. We also donate 10% of all merch sales to United 24. But that's one thing that we always want to try and make as clear as possible, and has always been something that we prided ourselves on, is that we try and be as transparent as possible up front, instead of trying to have to do a lot of work to prove to y'all that we're transparent and here's where all of the money's going. Instead, y'all get to pick. So Toadman the First, if you want to support the channel, like say with a $100 super chat tonight, you throw in the $100 super chat. But if you want to support Ukraine more than you want to support this channel, you just don't throw in a super chat and you wait until Sunday when we run a fundraiser for a nonprofit in Ukraine, and then you put all of your money towards that instead. That's how we end up running it, so that way y'all actually get to pick the exact amount of money that goes to us and goes to the nonprofit, or goes to that fundraiser that Sunday. So there isn't any ambiguity about how much of it do we send and how much of it do we keep. Y'all get to decide on y'all's end up front. How much do I want to give to them in a super chat, or how much do I want to give to a nonprofit that is helping out in Ukraine? Or in the end, what do I want to give to the enforcers, or what do I want to give to support Ukraine? That's really the kind of decision that we allow y'all to make on y'all's own. But with that, I thank you so much massively, once again, Toadman the First, for supporting this channel and helping us to keep this thing running, and also wanting to continue to help support the channel, because massive support like yours helps to make this thing possible, helps us to keep this thing running, and thank you so much once again for enjoying this channel massively and wanting to help this thing to be possible and helping it to keep rolling, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to keep this thing rolling, we wouldn't be able to make it possible, and we're always massively appreciative to folks like you for helping us to be able to do this as our full-time job, being able to cover news from around the world and also do war analysis on top of that. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one is another massive super chat, this time from Southern Stables Automotive.
Hey!
And this is the first time I've ever seen them throw in a super chat. So a huge shout out to you, Stables Automotive, for the very generous support. That's massive. And they said, watch history. It will tell you everything you need to know, and we repeat it at a frightening level.
And I thank you so much for the massive support, Southern Stables Automotive, and your first support in the history of the channel. That is unbelievable. And I got to thank you so much once again for the amazing support and helping this channel to keep on running. And also, I do watch history a lot. Something that some people may or may not know is that I actually have a bachelor's degree in history. I went through 4 years of college learning literally just history. How useful is that degree in real life? Not that much. Is it useful on this channel? Yes, it is. It's very useful on this channel. And so I would say that, yes, history does repeat itself. Actually, I more so like the statement that Otto von Bismarck, the statesman from Germany in the late Victorian era, said about history. He said that history does not repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And I find that to be probably the most adept description of the course of events in the world. Things rhyme greatly in history. Things look very similar to each other, and there is a decent amount of changes from each time period to the next, but the situations are really identical in the best sense possible to describe them, like Otto von Bismarck did. They do rhyme. It looks very similar. Like, for example, what we're seeing right now in Ukraine, it is very similar to the Finnish Winter War of 1939 or the Soviet-Polish War of 1919 to 1921. There's also a lot of comparisons to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. There's a lot of comparisons to be made. Really, to be quite honest, history does rhyme a lot, or if you want to say repeats itself, it does it loads. And by looking into the past, you can really find out quite easily how the future is going to unfold, because one thing that never really changes is how things turn out. A lot of people are always thinking that the modern world is this unknown place of different kinds of situations, different kinds of circumstances that no one's ever seen or dealt with before. And while that may be true on the technological end, the basic level of things has never really changed. Diplomatic exchanges are the same now that they were in Roman times. The kind of wars that we fight are fought with the exact same metrics that a war would have been fought in ancient Rome. The only thing that has really changed are the players in the game, the kind of equipment or technology that they possess, and the amount of time that has elapsed in between the ancient Romans and us in the modern day. It may as well be the exact same thing. And I would have to say that you are absolutely correct on that completely, Southern Stables Automotive, on what you're saying right there about history repeating itself. And I would highly suggest that anyone who wants to know how the world will unfold in the future, just take a look at history and look into the past, because it says so much about how our world will evolve today. And also, on top of that, when you look into history, make sure, folks, and I gotta say this a lot, make sure never to listen to people who don't really have a good grasp of history or use history as a weapon. Anyone who portrays history in a positive or negative light, depending on the thing, are people that y'all should not listen to. History is a story, and like every story in the world, there are good parts to the story and there are bad parts to the story, but you take it all as it is. And that is something incredibly important to remember. And that's something that I have to say I'm always very unhappy about with the American political field, and I will cover this evenly so that we remain within our no politics rule. But both sides in the United States weaponize history and blatantly lie about things that are not true if you know anything about history. It is something that I always find a major disservice, is how people use history as a sword or a weapon in modern politics by trying to morph history to make things sound like it's far more acceptable, because things have always been like this according to the people who say it. And that is a kind of history that you should never listen to. It is as dangerous as any other kind of a weapon, and you should look at history as objectively as possible when trying to study it or learn about it, because you learn so much more that way than you would trying to propagandize history or create a weapon out of it to use as really political dogma. That is something that you certainly want to avoid, and you want to make sure to understand history as objectively as possible, and actually try. And another thing, and this is something that actually is very interesting in the field of history, you were actually taught in history class that you should try and actually understand where everyone was coming from at the time, which is something that a lot of people would really get kind of offended by, but that's the only way that you can really understand history. So when you read the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx, instead of, while I heavily denounce communism, at the same time, you've got to sit there and you actually got to try and put yourself into the shoes of Karl Marx and understand what his motivations are and why he's saying it. And in the end, you can disagree or agree with the philosophy, but at least you have a good footing to understand where Karl Marx was coming from, and why in the world were Karl Marx's ideas written down in the Communist Manifesto, why did they end up being so popular and so influential around the world? And the same thing with everything else. Literally every other topic in history, whether it be good or bad, it is so important to understand both sides of it, because it gives you the perfect, well, not the perfect view, but the best kind of a lens possible to look at situations in the modern day and really analyze them for what they are and figure out where they'll be going. And so with that, Thank you so much once again, Southern Stables Automotive, once again for support. And I also just said, I also just saw you say, "I'll shut up now." Sorry, no, don't do that. I don't know what's happening in the live chat. I just saw that. I was like, no, don't do that. But I got to thank you for the massive support and throwing that in. A certainly true statement. And I got to thank you massively once again for supporting this channel and helping this thing to keep on running, because folks like you make it possible for me and Matthew to be on air every single night and running this show. Folks like you are what keep the Lee Spring Army alive, what helped this channel to keep on running, and thank you greatly for your first super chat in the history of this channel ever. It helps us out massively, and it makes this channel a actual reality for thousands, tens of thousands of people every single night. And so with that, thank you so much once again, and we are on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to be moving on into the frontline news.
All right, and the last one of the segment goes to Walter A. Lakota Jr., who is a channel legend,
Hey!
and he threw in a very generous $50 donation, and thank you very much, Walter, once again, for that support. He says, "Aloha, Enforcer Matt, and LSA from OG Ellison Bosun." He says, "It seems time will tell this summer in this war, and maritime fact, waterline is how much the ship is in the water, and draft marks on ships is 6 inches high and 6 inches in between each number."
And you know something, Walter A. Lakota, that's one of the first naval facts that I actually know, the water line. I have known that one for a pretty good bit. And I always found it really cool how much a ship's water line can change based on the amount of ballast or cargo that it's carrying. It's really interesting to look at, because when you see a completely unladen cargo vessel, it almost looks like it's sitting on top of the water instead of in it. And let me see if I can pull up unladen cargo ship, and let me see if I can show this to y'all, because it is really cool to look at. And here we go. Here's a good example of it in this picture right here. This is a completely unladen cargo vessel right there. And you can see that the water line, which is usually, when fully laden, it's close to this red line here, because this special paint, this is a special kind of a paint, that I believe makes sure that the hull doesn't oxidize as quickly or rust, which is really interesting and kind of a cool fact about the paint. But beyond that, it is so cool to see how much the waterline on a ship can change. And thank you so much for the support, Walter A. Lakota, and sharing that cool maritime fact with us, because maritime facts are incredibly cool. And the maritime world has so much to do with how this world evolved and progressed, even in the modern day, with how modern cargo is transported from place to place. But still, I will completely agree with you on that, Walter A. Lakota. Time will tell in the summer who will end up on top. And I think it's looking like the Ukrainians will be able to end up eking out a good success, or at least successful defensive victories, because the Russians have already lost all of their momentum by this point. And because of that, that means that the Russians would have to stop, try and start planning out more offensive objectives, and then also building up supplies again, meaning that that would most likely take months. And considering that every single offensive that could possibly be conducted is already being conducted at this moment, it is very evident to me that the Ukrainians already have won the summer as far as we're concerned, because if anything, the Russians will have to stop and regroup, meaning that the ball will be in Ukraine's court to start conducting a large counteroffensive somewhere along the front line and possibly start breaking the Russian defensive positions. Although, to be quite honest, I don't really think the Ukrainians can do that either right now. I think, once again, like we were saying about a month ago, this war has kind of entered the phase of attrition, who will be able to outlast the other. And so it's kind of moved on from seeing who will break through the front lines and end up taking ground. It's more so about who can inflict the most economic damage on the other and survive longer and not go bankrupt. That's what I think the war's really turned into at this point. But I think, as far as we can tell, this summer will be indicative that the Ukrainians will probably end up on top, and that they will most likely end up winning most defensive battles. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the massive support, Walter E. Lakota, in helping this channel to keep on running. Folks like you make this thing possible, and I can't thank you enough for being here with us tonight and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, it is now time for us to move on into the frontline news, and we have a load of it. A lot of it to cover. And let me make sure to refresh this map here so that way we can get as up to date as we possibly can. And so here we go. Here is the 22nd of May. This is the 21st, and this is the 20th. As we can see, the Russian front lines have not changed over 48 hours at all. The Russians have not moved forward a single inch in this area. It is practically...
Wait a minute. Are you telling me that headlines that say Russia's advancing across the entire front line, are you saying that's false?
It's completely false. I mean, it's
Oh.
completely clickbait. And I don't even know who in the world would be trying to propagate lies like that at this point, because the Russians are attempting to move forward, but they're failing at moving forward, especially in the area of Kharkiv. Over 48 hours, no frontline changes have been documented. The area of no man's land near TK has expanded, but that's it. And that is not showing a clear Russian advance. That is just showing that Ukrainians are moving into more defensible positions along the heights that are north and east of TK. So going off of that, nothing has moved. I mean, like, literally, nothing has moved in this area. It is a 30 to 50,000 combat troop strong offensive that is in an area that is minutely small. It has not been able to move out of this area. It has been a complete and abysmal failure. This practically is already a defeat, and it's just a matter of time before Russian forces most likely withdraw from this offensive and try and move elsewhere, either further north to Sumy and Chernihiv, maybe showing that they are going to try and conduct an offensive in that area, or they'll be moved back down into the southeast inside of occupied Ukraine. Either way, this offensive is dead. It's completely dead, and the Ukrainians have practically won the thing already by just setting up very solid defensive positions. We can already see that the defensive positions once again are so solid that the Russians have really started to go into the throes of frustration and anger at the lack of success in this area, and have already begun to firebomb Vovchansk as seriously as they can. We were able to get a little bit of drone footage showing the city of Vovchansk, and we can see that fires burn over every area of the city as the Russians are throwing every single bit of artillery, either MLRS, towed artillery, or SPGs at this city to try and completely demolish it, so that way the Russians might be able to even get inside of the city a little bit more, although that is highly unlikely at this point. And with that, that is the end of the clip, and moving on from that little bit of news and on to our next bit, we also got to see a little bit of combat action happening in Vovchansk from one of the airborne units. Here's the clip, and we're going to be muting that. But we see right here, it is the 82nd Airborne. By the way, I just want y'all to keep a note. The 82nd Airborne was moved from the area of Robotny up into this area specifically because of the Russian offensive. This is the unit that is equipped with the Challenger 2 main battle tanks. They have about 13 of them, and only one of them has been destroyed by a lucky Russian artillery strike that apparently hit on the engine bay. But we can see here that the 82nd is engaging the Russian forces in Vovchansk. We can see that they brought in a Striker, another Western-provided vehicle from the United States, to lay down supporting fire for the airborne troops that are on these streets and to try and keep them down. We can see right here that they're highlighting a Russian position right in front of the Striker. And we see them laying them low and firing anti-tank weapons at them. And we can see the Striker moving out after popping at smoke grenades, and the video clip ends right there. But the 82nd Brigade once again inside of Vovchansk and making sure to hold their positions as best as they possibly can. Moving on from that and into our next clip, we also got to see the Russian 1,500 kilogram glide bombs were beginning to hit the city of Vovchansk. There are Ukrainian forces in this clip, but the reason why we are showing possible Ukrainian losses tonight when we usually do not is because I want to show y'all the severity of Russian bombardments on the city to get across the idea of how strong the Ukrainian defense is. The Russians are already throwing more munitions into Vovchansk than they did at Avdiivka during its strongest times, and it's giving us the idea that Ukrainian defenses are starting to adapt and overcome to heavy Russian bombardments, especially glide bomb bombardments, which are incredibly devastating, and we are starting to see that Ukrainian defenses are much more resilient than they normally have been, once again proving that Russian offensive abilities will be greatly depleted, even with the support of the Air Force, and that the Russians will be making minimal or no progress in the future through the town of Vovchansk. We can see the buildings that were highlighted here as Ukrainian positions, and we see the glide bomb coming in and practically leveling the building on the left completely. And we see them here throwing up the Russian badge that they have. Also, Matthew, I just want to say really quickly, for the Russians to talk about Nazis a lot, doesn't this kind of look, I don't know, a little bit like, Geschickt, weil like man in Deutschen war, you know, it kind of looks like that a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. The Russians are really projecting here. When anyone ever says like those people over there, they're really this. That's what they really are. And we exposed them. You can almost guarantee it 100% of the time. That's what that person really is, and they're just projecting.
Dude, absolutely, man. It would smell like bologna or hot dog meat or something. But anyways, moving off of that badge. We can then see here that they are highlighting more Ukrainian forces that they're going to end up hitting with another glide bomb, unfortunately. But once again, this video is being shown to prove to y'all how severe Russian bombardments are of Vovchansk. They are desperate to try and get a breakthrough at this point, even throwing some of their largest glide bombs into the mix to try and clear out Ukrainian forces and give them a way forward. And even still, no way forward has progressed for them. And we can see here the building, of course, completely leveled by the glide bomb. And that's the end of the clip, but still showing the actions happening in the city of Vovchansk. Of course, the Russians have made no advances in this area, and the Ukrainian defense stands strong. Moving on from that and into the area of northern Kharkiv, or near to the Plina front, as we call it, we also got to see Ukrainian forces in the Steel Border Brigade hitting Russian forces in this area. And we're going to be muting the Steel Border music, but we can see the Steel Border hitting those Russians, and once again reminding them that while there is no steel border on the Ukrainian border, they are going to be sleeping in concrete galoshes. And we can see them hitting the Russians over and over.
Hey, laddie, you really picked a bad fight this time, laddie.
Aye, laddie, you hit a bad time, my boy. You hit a bad one. But beyond that, we are going to be moving on out of this front, once again showing no progress being made, high losses being inflicted on Russian forces, but beyond that, no progress. It is a massive Ukrainian victory on this front, as we are seeing that Russian forces are being defeated, honestly, even beyond my expectations. I was expecting that the Ukrainians would probably get pushed back enough that we would see that a battle would occur near Ruski Tishki and also Peremolha, but we are not even seeing that at this point either. We're seeing that they are being completely contained, which is really honestly shocking. Unbelievable, really. But before we move on to the rest of the front lines, we have heard that Zelensky is planning to visit France to ask NATO to shoot down Russian drones over Ukraine. And a lot of people have been weighing in their thoughts on whether NATO should start to shoot down Russian drones flying over Ukraine. And some people are saying that the West should give weapons but stay out of the matter. Some other people are saying that the West should actually actively shoot the drones down. And then some people are saying that that we should do that only if Ukraine starts to lose. Also, I saw some people complaining about the poll and why we were talking about the West or NATO as a whole, and then the poll option said US. The reason why it says US is because there's a character limit. We can't break YouTube's coding system to be able to have unlimited characters, so we had to replace West with US because that's the only thing that would fit. But beyond that, what are people saying about that, Matthew, and what are you thinking?
So it looks like about 48% said the U.S. should simply give Ukraine weapons, but stay out and do not shoot down drones over Ukraine that are Russian. And it looks like 38% said the U.S. should help shoot down drones, and 7% said only do it if Ukraine starts losing. And on this one, I've said this before, and I'm going to stick with it. I think the U.S. should simply give weapons and support to Ukraine, everything they need to shoot down the drones, but there's no need for the United States or NATO to go in and do it for Ukraine. This is Ukraine's fight. And while we are, in my opinion, obligated to help Ukraine win this war, and we will, hopefully the U.S. will stick with that, it's not our place to go in and fight it for them. And I think Zelensky should recognize that. This is their war, and while we're committed to their security, we're not committed to going in and fighting on their behalf. The same thing, in my opinion, goes for Israel as well. We're not fighting Israel's war on their behalf. Whatever war they get into, that's their war. But in my opinion, I think I'm with the 48%. The U.S. should give the weapons, but stay out. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would actually have to say that I would have to agree with the 48% and the 7% in both regards. I think that we should give them weapons but stay out for the exact same reasons that Matthew said. So I'm not going to recap that again because he got that out incredibly well. But as far as Ukraine starting to lose, I would also have to agree with y'all. I think that we should start to shoot down drones directly if they start to lose. But up until that point, we just need to provide them the weapons and the know-how to be able to shoot them down. We don't want to get directly involved in the war. We once again have to remember that we are trying to stay as out of the war as we possibly can, while also making sure that the West prevails and the Russians are defeated. That has been our stance over the course of the war. That has been the stance for 819 days. And we have gone for an incredibly long time with that premise, with that philosophy, and it's done us fairly well. It's done Ukraine fairly well. It's done everyone about as best as they can. We do not want to throw all of the ability that we have had, or really the progress that we've had of staying out of this war, threw out the window pretty much, to then immediately throw ourselves into the war when we really didn't have to. If Ukraine started to lose, maybe we would want to throw ourselves into the war then. And I think, honestly, we probably would want to throw ourselves into the war to make sure that Ukraine doesn't collapse and that we still end up prevailing somehow, some way. But we wouldn't want to do that preemptively. We always want to make sure to hold at least some of our cards off the table, so that way if anything worse does happen, we can then throw them down and not show all of our cards immediately. That would be the best way that I could explain that right now, but I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, it's now time for us to move on up into the northeastern area, where we got to see that over the past 24 hours, absolutely nothing has changed. Nothing at all. Not a single frontline change. It's almost like people out there who are saying that the Russians are advancing might be lying. A little bit. Might be Russian propagandists. Maybe. But moving on into that frontline area, we were able to see that a Mista S got hit and started to cook off. And we were able to see that in this clip right here. And we're going to be muting that. And we can see the tank burning and cooking. Wait, we've seen this clip. You know what? We're not watching. That's a duplicate. Sorry, everyone. Once the fuel truck backed out, I was like, we've seen that before. That thing was about to blow up like a Roman candle, though. But anyways, moving on from that and down into the Severonsky Forest, we were able to see that the Azov unit, the 12th Azov, was dropping some bombs on some Russians. But apparently that's a little bit too much, so we're going to have to cut that one out. But we did get to see some other Russians getting shelled by Ukrainian artillery in the first-person POV. Pretty cool.
А, блядь. Хуя.
What a blast, блядь.
Где у нас? Вон, возле бани.
The sauna?
Уебало. Пидорасы, сука.
Oh.
Ooh, dang,
блядь.
oh my, опа, блядь.
Нихуя. Охуеть,
I'm
пидорасы.
not reading the subs. I'm not reading the
Хуя, как
subtitles.
староверу, нахуй, он в блиндаж. Сука. Фу, блядь. Я в рот ебал.
Is this the Russians?
Yes, this is the Russians being shelled.
Вот такая вот
He's acting
хуйня.
shocked that they're getting shelled.
Пиздец.
He's like, this is really effed up, man. I can't believe this.
He's like, no way, the enemy fires back. No freaking way, блядь. He's like, that's crazy.
It's an outrage.
Ooh!
Ёбаный в рот.
Dude, they are on the mark.
Нихуя. Деревьям падают. Уебал с дерева.
Oh, the Russians
сука,
love
лбом
that.
въебался. Охуеть. Вот это обстрел у нас. Ёбаный в рот. Фу. Еще летит.
Ooh! Oh my gosh! Dude, Ukrainian artillery is just on the
Чё
dot.
нахуй ебашут как? Фу.
And this guy's still standing at the door. What the hell's wrong with him?
Dude, this guy's like a Midwesterner when he sees a tornado. Like, straight to the porch, like, no way, look at that. Ooh, oh my gosh.
Oh.
You ought to just stay in the damn dugout and have some sense.
Фу.
Ooh.
Нахуй я ебал высовываться не буду.
There we
I
go.
just realized that.
Dude, Russian almost gets blown up 4 times and then finally decides, maybe I need to stay in here.
Охуеть.
Охуеть. But anyways, with that, that's the end of the clip. Showing us a goofy Russian, getting to show us, though, a pretty good first-person POV of what a Ukrainian shelling looks like, and it is terrifying even through the screen. Moving on from that and down into the area of Bakhmut, we were able to see that massive frontline changes have happened over the past 24 hours. Oh my god. Oh my god, it's over. The Russians are advancing, y'all. It's over. I mean, like, they advanced about a collective 50 meters across the entire front line in Bakhmut. Guys, it's over. Pack it up and go home. Ukraine is a lost cause. I mean, with these kinds of advances happening, who in the world can even wake up happy in the morning knowing that the Russians advanced 50 meters? I mean, do you know how many lives that cost them to do that? 1,300. Do you know how many square feet of ground they get for every single guy that dies? I mean, hell, it's nothing. Like, it's like a few inches per person dead. So it's not really that big of a thing. And we have seen people blowing this up out of proportion because the Russians are making very small frontline movements day by day, slowly moving here and there. But the thing about it is that they aren't really moving large amounts of perspective that would make you say, wow, the Ukrainians are losing war. I mean, it's so slow that it's not really losing. And also on top of that, if I remember correctly, and let me go look at this. Let's see here. Let's see. I don't know why I keep on doing Amazing Grace right there. But let's see here. So this would be the map of Europe in 1915, May 23rd of 1915. Huge thanks to the Redditor who made this map, whoever that was. But if I remember correctly, and I swear, the Germans almost got to Paris in World War I, and somehow the Allies still ended up winning World War I. Am I wrong in thinking that? Is there something wrong with saying that there is the possibility that the enemy could advance and make ground, like we can see right here? There's Paris right there. And then here is the border of France right there. You can actually see it with Belgium. And then this big red line right here is where the Germans made it. And actually they made it a little bit further than that at their closest. But beyond that, wasn't that the case that the Allies ended up winning World War I? Or better yet, World War II, let's see, 1941 map of Europe. Why not? Let's go to 1941 map of Europe, and let's look at that. So, this is a map from December of 1941. And one thing that's really interesting about this, I don't know if you're seeing this, Matthew, but it looks as though that the enemy power took over one of the major allies, France, completely. Pretty much took over everything that they had in North Africa as well. Were fighting the British and advancing in Egypt. It also looks like they were possibly had possibly also taken over and controlled Greece, Yugoslavia, Belgium, the Netherlands, Poland, a good amount of the Soviet Union, all the Baltic states, in Norway as well, and Denmark. And somehow, some way, the Allies ended up winning that war as well.
Yeah, not shocking really, because when you're on Pervitin a lot, it kind of goes a little sideways. The jitters, the withdrawals, and all that stuff.
Aw, man. I mean, you're absolutely right. I don't even know who in the world could be that pathetic and pitiful to be like that, terrible. But beyond that,
I do. You
what?
know who?
Who?
You know who? You know who's that pathetic?
Who?
Someone this pathetic that they just never accomplished really anything. They tried their hardest, but they fell every single time. You know who I'm talking about?
I'd have no idea, Matthew. Who in the world would that be?
Nazi Germany.
Exactly. Like, exactly. Dead on the mark. I mean, it's Nazi Germany. And that's something that I just want to get out to y'all time and time again, that a lot of people don't get. A lot of people who have two-dimensional battle analysis, they don't really think beyond their nose or beyond the crack pipe, think when they look at battle analysis, is that you can lose battles, you can lose ground, and as long as you're able to recover or improve the logistical situation, or really the home front situation compared to the enemy, you will win. It doesn't matter how much ground you lose. And that's something that some people don't get. I mean, it just... not at all. And I gotta say that it's very sad to see people believe, folks like that who have no knowledge of how wars have gone in the past. Because some people would lead you to believe out there that wars are only won if you never lose ground, if you never even lose a single life, and you just end up curb stomping the other people from the start. And that just doesn't really seem to show in history. Not much at all. In historical examples, just World War I and World War II included, or in the Soviet-Afghan War, or the United States invasion and occupation of Afghanistan, or in the Vietnam War, or in, let's see, what else? Or in the British War in Afghanistan, or, a whole other bunch of wars, like the let me think. There's just so many of them. I mean, there's an endless amount of them. You could really think about them for till the end of time. And you would come up with a million examples where people almost lost their entire country, but somehow ended up coming back from the grave and winning. So with that, I hope that does at least address that the best we can, at least about the tiny frontline movements happening in this area. But moving on to the clips, we did get to see a BMD-3 get destroyed. Whoa, that is copyright probably. But we can see here the BMD-3 hitting that bump and probably putting a bump on everyone's head right there. It's just like, ooh. We see it continuing to roll along, but they don't know that they're in the crosshairs of the Ukrainian forces. And, ooh, hit dead on the nail. Obliterated. Blown away. Ooh.
You know that meme that everybody puts up when there's always rumors about the Kerch Bridge about to like go down. They put that old man doing the siren noise. Ooh,
Yeah.
it's like that's what they need right here,
Dude, better yet, I like that old guy who looks like Larry David that goes, "Ooh, kill him!" Like, I like that guy better. Like, I think he's funnier in my opinion. But still, moving on from that into our next clip, we also got to see a destroyed T-90. Oh, it was removed. Anyways, moving on from that and into our next clip, we did get to see another T-90M get knocked out. I think this is the actual video of it getting knocked out, but it doesn't show the picture. Because interestingly enough, this T-90M was actually modified to where it had like improv cameras on top of the cope cage. We don't really know what it was for, but we can actually see that T-90M right there getting hit pretty badly. And we can see it now coming to a stop and smoking. And remember, folks, no smoking. Or better yet, hey, you can't park here. And the Russians be like, suka, bля, пиздecki ты нахуй, you know, just going crazy. But you know something? You know something? They might go crazy, but hey, they still don't get they still don't get the smoke we get. But they're about to get smoked though. They're not getting smoked, but they're getting smoked, you know what I mean? And we see them getting hit right there, and we see one of them going out and over. And with that, that's the end of the clip. But huge credit to the Black Swan unit that was able to conduct this little strike. Moving on out of the area of Bakhmut and down into the southern front, where no frontline advances were made in Bakhmut, we were also able to see that the Russians are beginning to use actual bowmen, like human bowmen. Like you would see these people in Kingdom Come Deliverance. And they are using actual, I guess you could say, steppe warbows is the best way to explain it. I have never seen anything like this. You wouldn't believe, Matthew, what they're using these guys for, to shoot down drones.
Oh, really? Like, are they even accurate?
Apparently, from what the Russian propagandists are saying, it's silent, precise, and efficient. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm kind of doubting it, but this is whack. I've never seen anything like this before. We actually got Mongol bowmen up here. like we got Mongol bowmen entered the chat, and they're now in the war. Like, I've never seen this before.
It's Robin Hood, Russian style. He's going to do AI bot like aiming at the drone and hit it somehow with a old-fashioned bow and arrow. Like, who would have known that all the high-tech methods for taking down drones really haven't worked that well? But yet the bow and arrow is all they needed the whole time.
Who would have known, Matthew? And you know, Matthew, this is Russian bliethhood right here. He goes, "I steal from poor." And F him. Like, that's what he says. He's just like, man, I just steal from the poor. There's nothing else to it. I just steal. That's what they do. But beyond that, I gotta say, this is whack. Also, someone said Robin Hood in Ukraine. No, this ain't no Robin Hood. I'm sorry. This is a Russian guy right here. This is this is Robin Hood. He's Robin. That's it. Like, there's no giving to anyone. It's just straight up Robin. Watch out for your dishwasher.
When the Russians say, "Oh, he's Robin Hood," they don't mean like first name Robin, last name Hood. They mean like he's Robin the Hood. That's what they mean.
Dude, they say he's Robin the Hood, blid. And you go, wait a minute, isn't it Robin Hood? No, it's Robin the Hood. Like he does not like.
Oh, you mean he's ransacking the place?
Yes, he is Ramsack. That's his name. It's Ramsack, like Sinbad and 40 Thieves, blid. He's what Sinbad. It was Sinbad, Matthew. That was the guy. Sinbad and his 40 Thieves, blid. He is Bad Sim, you know, like, you know what I mean?
Bad Sim, bad.
Ransack, blid. But with that, that's the end of this little bit of news right here. I just thought I'd show that to y'all because it is a little wild. But beyond that, we're going to be moving on into our next clip where we got to see the 4th Brigade in the woods down there with their tanks. Aren't they cool? They are cool and covered in trees and limbs, and they're driving them around. They look like they're having fun, and I bet they're having a lot of fun. And so moving on from that and down out of this area and up into the area of Avdiivka, we were able to see that over the past 24 hours, things have changed. Oh my God! The Russians are advancing. Like, I can't even say they were advancing so quickly, you can't even see it. But they are advancing, and it's over. It is over, Matthew. Pack our bags. We're leaving. We're fleeing like the president of Afghanistan. We are putting $100 million in the chopper. We're out of here like the Shah. We come over to the United States for kidney surgery, and we're gone. Never back to Iran, ever.
I'm telling you, man, it's terrible. You know, the pro-Russian propagandists that put in their video titles, and they say, Russia's advancing across the whole front line, but yet you see this map right here, and they're not. They could easily, so easily put in their headline, Russia not advancing across the whole front line, and probably get more views that way. But it makes you wonder, what's the motivation behind it? What's the motivation, man? Because we see with our own eyes they're not moving, but yet the video titles remain.
Because lying like that, Matthew, makes money, and it takes money to buy those expensive airplane tickets, as you and I both know. But moving on from that and into the area around Otradine, we were able to see that the Ukrainians were able to push back into Otradine. This was filmed on the 19th of May, but we finally got the footage today, and this is confirmed to be on the outskirts of Otradine, which is showing that the Ukrainians have actually pushed the Russians back as of the 19th of May, and we were able to get the video footage today. We're going to be muting the Cyberpunk 2077 music, but we can see a tank from the 115th Brigade of the AFU advancing into the town with no infantry support, weirdly enough, but advancing into the town. Taking like a hard swerve right there. We now see them moving up to the Russian ammo depot and getting ready to level it. We can see them pointing the gun straight in the window, or the cannon more so straight in the window. Are they about to bust a cap? I think they will. Be patient and find out. We can see right there the Russian position is finally spotted. And that Ukrainian tank is out for blood. It's about to get him soon. It's just making sure to line up its target and get positioned properly. And a boosh right on the target.
A little bit of that red smoke, too.
And I saw someone say that this channel's title tonight on this stream is clickbait. Matthew, what the hell?
Were they saying that about our channel, or were they saying that about, like, what we're referring to, like the people putting Russia advances across the front line?
I don't know. Please clarify that, because I think the person knows who I'm talking about. So please clarify that in our chat, because we would like to know. But still, we can see right here that the Ukrainians are obliterating this small Russian ammo depot in Otradine. And, oh, look, BC Scamming's here. I actually have not seen BC Scamming in the live chat the whole time. I just saw him go, kaboom. I was like, oh, hey, there he is. So I was like, no way. And you see the Ukrainian tank still moving around, still positioning itself. And it looks like that Russian position has been obliterated. And we now see the tank turning around. It actually took a moment to back up. I was like, wait a minute, is it about to just back up and start obliterating this building? That's why I had like a pause there, but then it just moves away and slow! We love that slow!
Also, I see that Adept has said, what's that red smoke? Could it have been rust?
Red smoke where? What part of the clip?
That red smoke, when that tank, that vehicle fired, it like blew red smoke everywhere when it hit.
Let's see here. This?
Yeah, see when it fired right there, it blew red smoke everywhere. Watch. It'll go bing.
That is bricks turning to mist. Like that's what that red color is. Yeah, because it's actually the red bricks that the building's made up of. When the high explosive shell hits it, it has enough explosive force to vaporize the bricks. So that dust is literally just bricks that have been vaporized.
Oh, I'm I'm sure there's some people that love to snort that.
Aw, man. Aw, man. Moving on from that, however, and on into the area of Solovovy, we got to see that another Bradley was in the Magura unit. We see these like daily, but I love Bradleys, so I can't not have my Bradley shout out, but I love the Bradley infantry fighting vehicle. Really cool, and nice to see one once again in the 47th Magura. Moving on from that, and out of the area of Avdiivka, it's now time for us to move on down to Staromykolivka, where we got to see a damaged Russian tank, a T-72B, that had been plastered today. It's smoking up. And also, thank you everyone for hitting the like button tonight. It is incredibly appreciated. And we love to know that all of y'all appreciate and enjoy this channel. And really like it. Really enjoy it. And we see here, those tanks are roasted. Cooked up quite nicely. And with that, that's
Look at all that junk popping up on the right side of the screen. What was all that?
I have no idea. I saw that. I was like, we're just going to ignore that. And then you brought it up. I was like, dang it. I was like, I don't know what that is. Like I don't know how to answer that question. But with that, that's the end of the clip right there. Really nice to see. And moving on from that and down into the area of Mospine, we also got to see that an ATACMS missile ended up hitting some air defense down here. Blowing it up. Look at that. Isn't that nice? Look at those smoke plumes. It's beautiful. Hey, thank you so much, BC Skyman.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you. I've never seen that super sticker before. That's why, it caught my eye. I was like, I've never seen that one.
Упала. Я надеюсь, там не жилые.
Неизвестно.
And with that, that's the end of the clip right there. But still, nice to see. Moving on from that and on into our next clip into the area of Volodymyrivka, we also got to see that the counter battery was destroying a 2S1 Gazivka. And here is the clip. Right there. It's gone. No further explanation. With that, we're now going to be moving on from that little clip and on into our next one further down the lines, near Wheelapole, where we got to see that an AS-90 was in a new camo pattern, but something went wrong. Please try again later. And that's the exact same thing dying YouTube channels say. But moving on from that, we got to see what's left of a BMP-3 after a Baba Yaga attack. And we can see right here in the caption, it says, Baba Yaga! It's like, Baba Yaga blade! But here's what the aftermath of Baba Yaga looks like after it hits a BMP-3.
Ну вот, Саш, вот такую беду.
That right there is the inline engine block that sits below the infantry compartment. It appears that it has been separated from the rest of the vehicle.
Приносит нам.
And there is the rest of the vehicle in pieces.
На этом месте
Reese's
стоял
Pieces.
Бэха тройка. Тут был лесок, у нас прям хорошую машину замаскировали. Сеть, все. Прям добротный лесок был. Вот на этом месте стояла Бэха тройка.
We see some of the
Залетела
torsion
Баба Яга,
bars.
сделала 3 сброса. Один в массети застрял, пацаны успели убежать.
Look at all those torsion bars. That's a lot of suspension out there.
Попал в машину.
This bad boy could fit so much BMP on it. I'm sorry, it actually got blown up. So there's no more BMP, but it could, you know, hypothetically.
Детонация. А третий снаряд она скинула, но он не сдетонировал. Сейчас я покажу, какую беду она носит на себе. Вот кумулятивный снаряд. Вот так вот. На самом деле необходимость в тепловизорах есть, так как у нас посты выставлены, чтобы она, ну, не долетала, так сказать, в тыл, не сбрасывала технику, не жгла, да и личный состав, чтобы сохранить.
And that's the end of the clip, but wonderful to see that the Ukrainians were able to blow up a BMP-3 and we were able to see the aftermath. Really fun. Moving on from that and down into Odessa, we also got to see that the Ukrainians are starting to mass-produce rocket drone boats. We can see one in testing right here on the back of a trailer, but what these things are your normal Magura drones, but they outfit them with 122mm MLRS rocket tubes, load them, and then they fire it off all as one barrage. So they get about 6 of these rockets off at a time. It is a way to bring rocket artillery to the seas and to also try and create a possible situation where the Ukrainians could start to bombard discard Russian forces while not putting their own forces in danger, which is a huge plus in areas where there's a large amount of access to the Black Sea or to the rivers of Ukraine, which is really cool, and hopefully we'll get to see that this kind of technology begins to blossom in the future. But moving on from that little bit of news right there, it's now time for us to move on from Odessa and on up into the area of Kyiv, because we have an air defense report. Y'all thought I was making a speech, didn't you? But we actually got an air defense report. We were able to hear that the Ukrainians shot down 24 Shahed 136s overnight. An impressive air defense report, and once again showing the Ukrainians are on the ball. And so, moving on from that and into Kyiv, it's now time for us to cover the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on the 819th day of the war. And so, without further ado, here is the speech.
Дорогі українці,
Dude, I actually thought that was him for a second. I was like, wait, I didn't even pause it. Like, he actually sent me through a mind warp. I was like, Дорогі українці України. Like, I was like, what the hell? Like, but anyways, here's the speech.
українки, коротко про цей день провів нараду спеціальну на базі РНБО та Ставки секретар РНБО Литвиненко, начальник Генштабу Баргилевич, віце-прем'єр Федоров, міністр Камишин щодо нашого українського виробництва РЕП, дрони, наша ракетна програма, наша протидія російським керованим авіабомбам. Складна тематика, і якщо по РЕП, по дронах, по ракетній програмі ми бачимо хороші тенденції, то із протидією російським бомбам ще треба дуже багато зробити. Деталі сьогодні обговорили, альтернатив не може бути. Україні потрібні системи і тактики, які дозволять захищати наші позиції, наші міста і громади від цих бомб. І це зараз фактичний основний інструмент російського терору і просування окупанта. Говорив сьогодні із генералом Сирським щодо фронтової ситуації. Доповідь головкома була вранці і от нещодавно. Напрямки основних боїв не змінились. Це передусім Покровський та інші Донецькі напрямки, також Куп'янський напрямок на Харківщині. Максимум уваги всьому прикордонню зараз. І не лише у Харківській області, але й також на Сумщині. Завдання для наших підрозділів, загалом для сил оборони теж незмінне. Ми маємо якнайбільше завдавати втрат окупанту. І я дякую кожному воїну, кожному солдату і командиру, які дійсно влучні, які дійсно забезпечують нам усій нашій державі необхідні результати. Особливо відзначу за бої цими днями 57-му окрему мотопіхотну бригаду. Обороняє район Вовчанську, загалом нашу Харківщину. Стійко утримує позиції та знищує окупанта саме так, як потрібно. Дякую, воїни. Також 82-га окрема десантно-штурмова бригада. Дякую вам, хлопці. І ще Покровський напрямок, 47-ма окрема механізована бригада. Молодці, воїни. Хочу зараз окремо подякувати Швеції та пану прем'єр-міністру Крістерсону особисто за сьогоднішнє нове рішення про довгострокову підтримку нашої держави, наших людей протягом наступних 3 років. Загальний обсяг – $7 мільярдів. І це дійсно відчутно і зміцнить не лише нас, не лише Україну, але й увесь європейський периметр від Балтики до Чорного моря. Всюди, де російські божевільні можуть спробувати переглянути кордони на землі або на морі. Також сьогодні продовжив дипломатичний марафон підготовки першого глобального саміту миру. Особисто запросив на саміт ще 4 держави. Говорив сьогодні з лідерами Чилі, Албанії, Австрії та Мозамбіку. Плюс 4 держави на саміті. Дякую. Звичайно, ми обговорили і наші двосторонні відносини. Зараз кожен лідер, кожна держава здатні проявити своє лідерство, щоб саме цей рік став часом перемоги міжнародного права і справедливості. Часом, коли програє не просто один агресор, а сама ідея війни, ідея перетворювати життя народів на руїни. Російська агресія спробувала перетворити статут ООН на музейний експонат. Наш саміт миру та участь глобальних лідерів здатні повернути статуту ООН повну дієвість і повний захист кожній нації. Я дякую усім, хто вже нам із цим допомагає. Дякую кожному лідеру, який дає потрібні сигнали іншому світі, сигнали щодо того, що саміт дійсно наблизить справедливе завершення цієї війни. Слава Україні!
And
Herom Slava.
And with that, that was the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 819 of the war. And that is going to move us on. I don't know why I say war like that at the end of every single speech. I always say war instead of war. I don't know why. I don't know. But beyond that, we are going to be moving on into the second segment of the stream, where we get to talk to each and every one of y'all. We get to talk to everyone who threw in a super chat and thank them for their support. And then after that, we're going to be moving on into addressing all of the live chats that we can, time permitting, of course. But I do have to say that it has been incredible to have y'all all here with us tonight so far. Just tonight alone, there was 8,100 people here at the peak of the stream, and already 43,000 people have watched it. We are entirely appreciative to be able to share the news with all of y'all, and hopefully we'll get to share some pretty interesting and fun moments here in a moment as we get to talk to all y'all. But still, we are massively appreciative for all of y'all being here tonight, and I thank y'all all so much once again for sticking with us thick and thin through everything that has gone on out there. And so with that, Matthew, take it away.
All right, so jumping into our last question segment, we have one poll left to address. And the question says, the UK says it has intel that China is now supplying lethal aid to Russia, and what do you think? It looks like 53% of the people said China should be sanctioned heavily, and while 37% said China supports their ally, it's pretty much status quo, and 4% said, there's really nothing to do, question mark. And I guess there are more sanctions. We can always put more sanctions on China, but ultimately, though, that might come back to hurt us more than it's actually hurting China. So I'm not sure if that's a realistic option or not. But for the 37% that said China supports their ally at status quo, I can understand where you're coming from on that. I'm not saying that China supporting Russia is a good thing, but it's essentially the same thing that we're doing in the West by supporting Ukraine. That's what China's doing with their ally, which is Russia. So it's not entirely unexpected, but of course there's a right and wrong side here. We're on the right side, supporting Ukraine, which is a sovereign country, and China's on the wrong side, supporting an invading country, which is Russia. So while it's the same thing in essence, it's a little bit different, but I'm with the 37%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that in my opinion, I would have to be with the, let's see here, that's actually kind of a tough one. I would say that's kind of status quo, but at the same time, I would start to lean pressure. I would not sanction the Chinese immediately, but I would start to lean pressure on if our intelligence continues to show that you're supplying lethal aid to the Russians, then we are going to start consider sanctioning. We might not follow through on that, and we probably wouldn't. But at least I would put some pressure on the Chinese to go, oh, we might want to, prioritize our economic standing at the moment, considering how fragile it is, than supporting the Russians, which is something that no matter whether they win or lose, we've kind of won what we need out of this, which is making sure that the Russians will be economically dependent on China well into the foreseeable future. So to be quite honest, I would have to say, I think that we should possibly consider sanctioning them. I don't think we should just completely ignore what they're doing, and I don't think we should go ahead and sanction them immediately, but I think we should already start on that path of saying, hey, we don't really like what you're doing. Sanctions might be coming around the corner, and then see what their response is from there. And if their response is good and they stop supporting the Russians, and our intelligence shows that, then we don't go any further. And if they continue to support the Russians, then we'll actually have to be at the head. Do we do something about that and start sanctioning them, or do we overlook it? And then we'll have to start weighing the damage that could be affected on the United States by that kind of a decision. But with that,
You gotta admit, like, first of all, I want to make this clear because someone's going to take my words out of context here. China is our adversary, and China is a communist country, and I don't support China whatsoever. But one thing I will give credit for is China has positioned themselves pretty damn good when it comes to having leverage over the United States, because like I mentioned a moment ago, when you put sanctions on China, it's almost like putting sanctions on ourselves almost, because we get so many goods and different trade things from China that it ends up hurting the United States almost as bad as it's hurting China in some cases. So it kind of puts us in a catch-22. China is sort of free to do what they want, and also it's the reverse as well. China sort of lets us do whatever we want as well, without too many sanctions being thrown around because of the sort of symbiotic relationship that the two countries have, which really prevents us from punishing China for doing any bad deeds that they do. But that's just me. But Enforcer, what do you think?
It is a good point. I mean, like it is a bit of it's a bit of a major issue because we have such a major trade relation with the Chinese. It's hard to really do anything to them directly through sanctions and then not end up hurting ourselves maybe greatly in the meantime. And that's what makes it fairly difficult. And that's why I'm saying we would probably have to. We could of course say something like that. And we have said stuff like that in the past to the Chinese, where we're like, hey, we don't like what you're doing. We may consider sanctions. And then at a time, we actually went through with sanctioning them at least on some things, but at the same time, it did end up affecting the U.S. economy a little bit. So while we do have a lot of economic leverage over the Chinese, and we could sanction them and end up causing them a decent amount of damage, we will also be causing ourselves a decent amount of damage as well. It's kind of like standing in front of the Chinese and then pulling out a gun and pointing it at our own head and saying, if we pull the trigger, we'll get the Chinese. Well, we're also going to get ourselves possibly at the same time about as badly. And that's kind of the thing that makes it so much more difficult when weighing out the situation about what do we do. Because unlike with the Russians, when we sanction them, it really just hurts them. It doesn't really hurt America because we'll find customers for whatever products we're making or whatever we're selling. But for the Russians, they like our products and they buy them a lot. And so they're the only ones who really get affected, not us. But with the Chinese, they rely a lot on our money and we rely a good bit on their goods. So it's a fairly difficult thing because we hurt them, we hurt us. So it's a little difficult. And also, Southern Staples Automotive said the failures of a world economy. Not quite, because it was always like this, quite honestly, even back in World War II and World War I, it was a lot like this, because global trade has been something that's really been going on since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in incredibly large form. It's just that one always has to consider who they're going to be major trading partners with. And I would have to honestly say, just being completely unbiased here, bringing the Chinese, or well, the United States sponsoring the Chinese entrance into the World Trade Organization and allowing them to have access to the incredibly low tariffs that everyone has access to in the World Trade Organization was a disaster. That happened in 2001. It was not a great idea. That's the entire reason why the Chinese economy started to skyrocket. And I'll show you all that, actually. You can actually see in the GDP growth where China entered the World Trade Organization. It was right there. You see how the Chinese economy was growing kind of sort of all right, but it wasn't really a lot. Like, you can actually see here, China was at 961 billion in 1997, and then only a few years later, about 4 years later, they were at 1.3 trillion, just to put that into perspective. Then once they entered the World Trade Organization, you can see that they really started to take off, and that's what's really led to a massive amount of their growth. Is this huge boom that they got from the World Trade Organization and the massively low tariffs that they get. It makes them predatory, honestly, as far as trade goes, because their products are so cheap due to how cheap their labor is that they will dominate anyone else. And this is something that we've seen a lot of countries in the past. Well, a lot of countries just in the Ukraine war have problems with, like all of the countries surrounding Ukraine that were getting flooded with incredibly cheap Ukrainian grains. They did not like that. Honestly, Ukrainian grain is predatory in a European market because of how cheap it is and how abundant it is. Everyone will pick Ukrainian grain before they pick their own domestically produced grain because cheaper prices always win. There is really no such thing as national loyalty when it comes to running a business. It's always about getting the cheapest prices. And that is something that we saw clearly with Ukraine and the grain situation, moving it into Europe. And that is something that we should have spotted early on when the Chinese started to dominate in the domestic products sphere. We should have started to say, wait a minute, we need to kick them out of the World Trade Organization, or we already need to start putting higher tariffs on Chinese goods. And that's another thing that a lot of people don't know. These low tariffs, the World Trade Organization sets a base tariff rate that goods are tariffed from one country to the next. But a country can unilaterally decide to impose tariffs on top of the World Trade Organization's tariffs onto other countries. And while we keep the Chinese at the base tariff rate, and I think it's like 2.5%, the Chinese have us, American goods, shipped back into China. I think it's like at a 40% tariff rate. So it is almost impossible or completely insane to try and run a business shipping things to China, because 40% of the price of the product or the prices of the goods is in tariff costs alone. And it's an insanely high amount. So if you have, like, say like a $1,000 iPhone that you're trying to ship from China to the United States, take that $1,000 price, add about $25 to it, and that's the tariff to bring it into the United States. But to ship a iPhone from the United States and back into China, it's 40%. So then you have to take that $1,000 iPhone price, tack on an additional 40%, so an additional $400. So it costs $1,400 to ship an iPhone into China. That is the kind of insane crap we're talking about economically in between the Chinese and the United States. I think, to be quite honest, that was a mistake. It's one that we have to live with now. We can't, like, live retroactively and pretend like this isn't a problem now. This is a problem that the United States will have to face. And I think for this reason, and also for the fact that competitive pricing will always win in a capitalist economy like we have, we need to find better trade partners. And we're already finding them right now. Mexico seems to be our next major trading partner. And in fact, as of about a year and a half ago, Mexico actually overtook China in the number of, the number of billions of dollars of goods that we import. Mexico actually overtook China, and it's the first time since, I believe, 2006 that has happened, that the Chinese have been overtaken by another country importing to the United States. And a lot of countries are starting to do that, and I think that this situation will sort itself out with the Chinese. We probably will be able to overcome this, because we already know that the Chinese are beginning to transition, and this is why there's a lot of economic upheaval in China, from a manufacturing economy or an industrial economy to a post-industrial service-based economy. We're already starting to see that right now inside of China, because with the rapid industrialization that China had over the past 2 decades, with it has come really the progression that the United States had over the entirety of the 21st century in about the span of 20 years, which means that they're already moving on into being a fairly advanced service-based economy, which means that Chinese manufacturing is starting to drop off, especially in its competitiveness, and now there are other countries that are starting to overtake them, specifically Vietnam and Mexico. They are starting to rapidly overtake. And I think that they will most likely end up making sure that we can naturally wean ourselves off the Chinese instead of having to forcefully wean ourselves off of them like we would. But Matthew, what do you have to say about this?
So I was just about to say that it's really interesting here, because I was just thinking in my head, I was like, the amount of power that China is exerting over the United States is like what countries sometimes go to war over, like trying to prevent us from sanctioning their country and things like that. The amount of economic control that China has over the United States basically is the equivalent of actually doing something militarily against the United States. It's that level of power they're wielding against us in an economic sense. Honestly, the United States has China beat when it comes to military might. We have them beat hands down. But China has us beat on the economic warfare side of things quite a bit. And I think that's how China sort of levels things out a little bit. And even Ukraine is starting to realize that sometimes you can fight troops and you can fight with militaries. That's one way to coerce a country to behave the way you want them to. But, for example, with Ukraine hitting the oil refineries inside of Russia, that is actually essentially striking at Russia's economy. And that's what Ukraine's really attacking, is the Russian economy by hitting those refineries. And the amount of power that has to end the war, in my opinion, is more powerful than eliminating Russian troops. Because Russia can continue to get troops and more, simply recruiting them off the street. But once the economy in Russia goes downhill and goes away, it's done. Like, Russia is finished. They can't fight the war. They'll run out of money, and the whole government's going to collapse. And that's what that's what Ukraine's realizing.
Damn, we overtalked each other. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
That's what Ukraine's realizing right now. That's what they're doing. But that's even what China does with the Belt and Road Initiative. They lure countries in to get that grip on them without having to invade the country. They put them under that Belt and Road slavery, and then they come in and really slam them hard later when the country ends up defaulting on the debt or something like that, and then they start exercising control over the country. It's just, we have to be on the lookout for that from China, because China is still doing it even more to this day. Like, they're doing that more and more. So, it's just sort of like a lack of, I think, understanding by some of the leadership of what China's real strategy may be.
I would completely agree with that. And I think that that's something that we really need to pay attention to in the future. And I think we need to wean ourselves off of, because if we need to be economically tied to imports coming from any other country, it needs to be one that is neutrally aligned, far smaller than us economically and population wise. And not only that, it will not end up turning against us in the future. With the Chinese, it was quite clear that they would turn against us in the future because, I mean, hell, they're a communist country. I mean, it wouldn't make a lot of sense. It wouldn't make a lot of sense for them to permanently be friends. Ideologically, they come at an impasse with us already. But with Vietnam, while it's a communist country technically, they're really more so capitalist these days again, because how do I explain Vietnamese communism? It's actually it's a really weird one. And I'm trying to figure out what in the world was the name of Vietnamese communism. Let me go pull it up. Vietnamese communism.
The People's Party or something. It's always the People's.
Let's see. So, dang, what the hell is it called? Because it was made, let's see. Oh, it's Ho Chi Minh Thought. That's what it's literally just called, Ho Chi Minh Thought. So that's what it is, and it's different. It's different in a way from normal communism, in that kind of like Chinese communism, but even more so. Their communism wasn't really about communism per se. It was just more so about not having other people in charge of Vietnam. And that's something that is a little interesting about Vietnamese communism, because that's actually what led to them going to war with China in 1979. If y'all didn't know that, China and Vietnam actually went to war not that long after the Vietnam War ended, from about 1979 to I think 1981. And y'all wouldn't believe this, but Vietnam actually won the war. Like they actually won it hands down. They actually ended up defeating the Chinese. It ended up maintaining their borders, which was a shock to most of the world, because everyone thought that the Chinese, with their overwhelming size and ability, would end up beating the Vietnamese, and then they didn't. But anyways, moving on from that, the big thing to get from that is that the Vietnamese are on their own. They're not going to side with the Russians, and the Chinese are not their friends either. And even nowadays, the Vietnamese are very leery and, in fact, unfriendly towards the Chinese, because the Chinese are trying to exercise claims that they have over Vietnamese islands, which causes a lot of friction. And so for that reason, we know that Vietnam would never turn against the United States in the future. They would most likely want to remain a trading partner and also lean into America, because they have a far larger rival on their border that is trying to take territory and land from them. So I would say, going off of that this is 100% a country that we need to lean into in the future for trade, and also Mexico for clear reasons. I mean, it's very obvious why you would want to tie in with Mexico. They're right on our border. They're a fairly friendly country. And when I say fairly friendly, your opinion on Mexico may be different than mine, but for most of the world, Mexico is a fairly friendly country. They are more than happy to conduct trade with us. And not only that, the tariffs of American goods going into Mexico and Mexican goods going into the U.S. are about on par. I think they're at the World Trade Organization minimum, or they're just a little bit above that. So it's not that big of a deal. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And also, I see a lot of people saying, let's see. It's a shit show to invade that kind of terrain. It really is. And oh man, I could go into rabbit holes all day. The only people who succeeded down in Vietnam and kind of winning in that sort of warfare, it wasn't the Japanese, it wasn't the French, it wasn't the United States. Crazily enough, it was actually the British. The British were the only people to succeed in this kind of fighting, which you would just not believe. Because imagine a whole bunch of pasty white dudes getting sunburned like all day and all year. And that's what they were. I mean, like, they were getting sunburned down there. That was actually one of the huge issues of the British expeditionary forces that were in Indochina, is sunburn and sun poisoning. That was actually one of the larger medical issues that I was able to hear about. But beyond that, they ended up doing incredibly well. Also, there was a lot of others, like, not just pointing that one out in particular. There was trench foot and the normal kind, but sunburn and sun poisoning was one that was really interesting, because it was like, so that's like they were just burning down there, like they were actually just burning alive. But beyond that, they did incredibly well, because the British approach has been carefully crafted over centuries, actually, to how they deal with local populations. And the British, unlike the United States and the French, actually ended up winning over the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese public because they put a lot more emphasis in their very brief occupation of the area because the French were not capable of reoccupying Indochina, which was their territory before World War II for a time. The British actually occupied it, and they ended up going up against the Viet Cong, and they almost wiped them out. If the British Army had been in Vietnam and had occupied Vietnam for just about a half year to a year longer, they would have actually completely eradicated the Viet Cong from existence. They were on the cusp of it. And British reports were showing that the Viet Cong's activity and resistance was greatly diminishing, especially under British control, and that given another 6 months to a year, they were most likely going to completely eradicate that resistance, and French Indochina would be stable. The problem is that the French government was completely offended that the British occupied Indochina and were running it. And so they made a huge diplomatic stink, and the British had to end up giving it up, I believe, 2 months after that report was made, that in 6 months to a year, the Viet Cong would be crushed. When the French returned, they ended up treating the Vietnamese local populations so poorly that not only did the Viet Cong grow, it actually skyrocketed in size and ended up actually beating the French army at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1954, which is what was like the precursor to the American involvement in South Vietnam and then the creation of the Vietnam War that we know of in the United States. But still, also, Tom Axman said, what year was that? I think it was 1945. It was at the end of World War II. And another interesting thing that the British did, this was another small fact, is that the British actually used former Japanese soldiers to a small extent against the Viet Cong, which was a really interesting thing as well. But they made the Japanese fight with British officers in charge, and also by British rules of engagement and by following the rules of war. And also I see a lot of people saying Viet Cong. And Matthew put Viet Cong in the chat. Before the Viet Cong were the Viet Cong, they were actually called the Viet Minh, which is stupid. like
Get the hell out of here.
Let's see here. One second. No, let me put it in. Viet Minh.
Viet Minh.
I'm not even kidding. Viet Minh, right there. Like, there it is. The Viet Minh. They were formed.
This is like Ho Chi Minh.
Man, look at this. Look. Formed in 1941 at the beginning of World War I when the Japanese occupied French Indochina, and they were dissolved in 1951. It existed. Like, this was the thing before.
How the hell did they get the name Viet Cong? Like, where'd the Kong part come in?
I think Viet Cong was like a derogatory term that we made.
Oh, damn.
Let me see. Let's see. But everyone uses it, so it just is what it is. Here we go. It's an epithet, an umbrella term to call the communist-driven armed movement and United Front organization in South Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. So that's what it is. But I don't know where Viet Cong came from specifically. Like, let's see here. Let's see here. Dwight D. Eisenhower. Oh, look, it's your favorite president, Matthew. Dwight D. Eisenhower. And so,
look. Dwight. Where's the Vietnamese come into the picture?
Vietnamese, dude, that comes in when you're like in your 70s and 80s. You start getting like knee problems. It's like, oh, Vietnamese. But anyways, dang it, man, I can't find the freaking name, like where Viet Cong comes from. I cannot find it. But anyways, let's see. Someone said I thought it was a slur. It's more of like it's not really a slur. It's just kind of like. It's kind of like calling Russians orcs. That's the best way that I can explain it. So it's not really like a slur like you would hear like someone throw out like as an insult. It's more so like orcs or calling the Germans krauts or something like, like in World War II. That would be along those lines. It's not really it's not like an actual like legit slur. You can say Viet Cong and there's no problem with it. That's what people call Viet Cong, because what else would you call them? The National Liberation Front of South Vietnam? That's a mouthful. Just call them Viet Cong. It's simple. But anyways, with that, I hope that does do that. Address that fairly well, at least from what I know. But still, thank you all for listening to this massive rabbit hole about trade, the Chinese, and then somehow the Viet Minh. But with that, I hope that does address that well. I hope that does clarify for everyone that there is such a thing as Viet Minh, because there is always, I'll have y'all know, there is always someone in the chat who knows more than me. Like when I say manufacturing, someone goes, "You idiot, you don't even know how to speak English. There's no such thing." And then I pull it up and it's in the Oxford Dictionary. Or I say Viet Minh, and then some people in the chat want to be like, "Excuse you, idiot, it's Viet Cong." And it's like, It's like, oh, sorry, like, I don't know. I only went to college for 4 years to learn nothing. I'm sorry. I should listen to you, who listens to like TikToks on history. Like, it's like I hate to sound like I'm always a little salty about that, but it always does get me a little bit when people are very ignorant and they are so arrogant while being ignorant. Like, I'm wrong sometimes, and I'll admit that. Like, even with 4 years of like college education and history behind me, I can be wrong, and I have been wrong in the past. And I'm totally okay with admitting that. But with people who act like snobs and are extremely arrogant and don't even have a professional education in history, and then want to argue with me about how words are pronounced that are historical or historical events, I'm always like, where the hell are you all coming? Like, where the hell are these people coming from? I don't get it sometimes. But anyways, with
I'm
that,
telling you what, those people that get their history lessons from TikTok, those people are like lethal, like with the misinformation, like
oh
pure
my
lethal.
God, dude, they
Like
are.
they come around and I'm like, I'm not even a history person. Like I don't study history a lot. I study the modern day for political science. Political science has history like in its like curriculum and stuff like that, but it's not a heavy focus on it. Not entirely heavy. More like theory behind political decisions. But whenever I see people with the TikTok education on history and they're coming out and they're being like, you see, communism is a great thing. And they've been watching like TikTok, which is owned by the Chinese government. And they're like, this is great. This is communism. I'm like, wait a minute. Where'd you learn this from? Oh, TikTok. I'm like, anybody gets their history from TikTok and thinks that's reliable, they're a little bit crazy.
Or better yet, some other good ones are like, the Russians are actually they are actually a breakaway from Ukraine instead of like a cultural split. Like, like it's like it just drives me crazy. And that's another thing about history being weaponized. And I've seen that a little bit over the course of the Ukraine war in the opposite direction against the Russians, is that some people try and make it sound like the Russians do not exist, like the Russians try and say about Ukraine. And a lot of people just, I don't know what it is with people trying to weaponize this. It was a cultural split that happened because of the Mongol invasion. I mean, yes, they like the Ukrainians and the Russians are a part of the same cultural family. Like they are. Like there's no argument against that. They're all a part of the Slavic culture group. But the thing is that both of them went through completely different experiences over the, I believe, 200 years that Mongol rule existed in Russia and Ukraine. And for that reason, the cultures then split from being just a Kievan Rus to, at the end of Mongol rule around the 1400s, you had the Rus, the actual, what we would know as the Russians of the future, of today, up in the area of Nizhny Novgorod, kind of sort of, but really in the Duchy of Muscovy, where it's just where Moscow is. And then you had the Ukrainians, which existed in the former heartland of the Kievan Rus. And so, the cultures just split. It's not that the Russians don't exist and they're actually Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians don't exist and they're actually Russians. They're literally just two completely separate cultural groups because of what happened back then. And so, and then a whole bunch of other people, and oh my God, this one drives me crazy. Oh, I saw it a little bit in the chat. Some people will say, well, everyone is actually a Viking. No. No one is a Viking. Like I hate to break it to people who love being Vikings. Hardly anyone's a Viking. Like, unless you're actually Norwegian, you being a Viking is like slim to none. And I know a lot of people are gonna be like, but Yaroslav the Wise, he was a Viking, like in charge of the Kievan Rus, and William the Conqueror, he was a Norman king. That's a Viking, right? Yeah, but that doesn't mean that everyone living in the Kievan Rus and everyone living in England then became Vikings. Like people from Britain are Anglo-Saxons. The royalty of the United Kingdom have Norman ancestry, which can be traced back to the Vikings of really Normandy. But that doesn't mean that the people are now Vikings, and that doesn't mean that everyone can trace their lineage back to the Vikings either, because it just doesn't work that way. I mean, unless if you can actually claim a royal title in Europe, it would be very hard for you to trace back any kind of Viking ancestry. And there are some exceptions, like, for example, if you're from the northeastern area of England, where York is, that was actually controlled by the Vikings for several hundred years, so you may actually be a bit of you may actually have some Viking ancestry in you, but then it kind of melded because of all the intermarrying of the local Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings. They kind of just melded into being Anglo-Saxons in the future. So even then, it's a little bit of a tougher claim. Or in Cornwall, where there was a decent amount of Vikings, or in the area of southern England, because there was also a little bit of them down there as well. Not as much though, but a little bit of them.
something I just remembered. You said the Vikings and stuff like that. I saw people saying, yeah, the Vikings are the boat people, and they like to get on ships and they like to go places. The Vikings had a good day way back in history and stuff like that, but they sort of fell off a little bit, and they got a little bit civilized. They let go of all that like manly stuff like the Vikings used to do, and they got very soft. So that's when they started Viking cruises, and started taking people around the world.
Oh, I didn't even see that one coming. And when you said that, I was like, "Oh my god, no way!"
I saw someone say Viking cruises. It was Steven Gerrard, and I was like, I gotta make a joke out of that.
And also, someone said this. Josh said, just going through some historical stuff. Someone said, so Vikings never violated anyone. No, they did that a lot. Everyone did that back then. I mean, like not to make that just sound normal, but that's what happened. I mean, that was just kind of the thing that happened when a group invaded. Ravaging was one of like the first things people went to. Just being entirely honest. But the thing is that even with that happening, and even with some people bearing children from that, that I guess you could say ancestry would, of course, get watered down massively because there's still a massive amount of Anglo-Saxons living there, like talking about England in particular. So they still end up pretty much melding back into being Anglo-Saxons over just a few generations. So even then, it's really hard to say that anyone would be a Viking just in that instance, because there will be folks who will be like, oh, like the Viking, like they're like the royal lineage of a country can be traced back to Vikings. Therefore, I'm a Viking. It's like, no, you're not. Like, I'm not a Viking. Nowhere close. Like my entire family is from the UK, from Wales, but none of it is Viking. Like none of it would be because they're all Anglo-Saxons or they're Celtic, one or the other. But anyways, moving on from that same thing, getting back to this about historical fallacies and all that stuff, it just drives me crazy when I see it because once you actually learn history on an academic level, even in a bachelor's degree, which isn't even close to what you learn getting a doctorate, which is very, very strenuous actually, in the history field, you learn a lot and you learn enough to know that some things just sound ridiculous. And let's see here. Let's see, I worked at let's see. And also Paramecium 13 said, according to DNA testing, I have a bit of Norse ancestry. If that is the case, that means that it probably was brought into your family from just a few generations ago. In our particular instance, we're actually Matthew and me are both about 8% Norwegian and 2% Swedish. Actually, no, I think it's the other way around. We're 8% Swedish. Yeah, it's 8% Swedish, 2% Norwegian. But the reason why that shows up in our DNA, in that kind of a larger number, is because that part of the family that we know of was introduced in the 1890s. So it's only a few generations away from us, and it was on our mother's side. So that I guess you say genealogy is passed down to us. But something from, say, 1,000 years ago, where the Vikings may have ruled over your lands in England, in the area around York, and then they were, of course, driven out eventually. I believe it was Harold Hardrada. I believe. I'm not really sure about that. It was some Harold guy because everyone at that point was named Harold in England for some reason. It was a really popular name. But he was the one who was in charge of this area. He ended up dying, and with him, the Vikings' rule of northern England kind of got pushed out. And because of that, because that happened 1,000 years ago, that would not show up if you were a Briton in your DNA, because it's been 1,000 years, it's been watered down by all the Anglo-Saxons living in England, and that is over. It's just not there. So it would be from a few generations ago, nothing new. So that means you're probably a lot like us. Like if you actually wanted to talk about what part of Norway or what Norwegian people would look like if you were to talk about your ancestry and when they were introduced, they would actually be the Norwegians of the 1800s, probably, a lot like us, where they dress in nice clothes, they have a very high standard of living already, the literacy rate's literally the highest in the world it could be at that time, and they're really just peaceful people doing their own thing up in the area of Northern Europe. That would be a lot of what your family would probably look like, a lot like ours was, because we know specifically that our part of the family that's Swedish, they were actually bakers by trade. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And who doesn't love some bread? You got to get up and get that bread. You know what I mean?
Man, they've got that good stuff too. I remember that Walt Disney World exhibit for them. They had some of that juicy, whatever that dessert thing was. Oh man, oh goodness. I don't know why we didn't inherit the cooking, but I should have some of that.
And now we have to get on like paid for food thing subscriptions to be able to cook well at all. I don't know what happened, but the food is bussin', I will admit. The food is bussin'. We're not gonna shout them out though because they're a company and everything. But still, I gotta say, food's bussin'. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and with that, we're now moving back to our super chat questions. And up first, we have a $50 donation from none other than BC Skyman, the channel legend, and he threw in a $50 donation. And huge shout out to BC Skyman for throwing in that generous support. And he threw in a super sticker of the Doge wearing a samurai get up, and it's got rocket launchers for feet or something. And also saying you're amazing. But thank you very much, BC, for the support. And Enforcer, what say you?
And thank you so much, BC Scammon, for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. Because folks like you helped make this thing possible. Yeah, I know why you didn't even throw in a statement, because we know what the statement would be, but we thank you greatly so much for it once again and helping this channel to keep on running, because folks like you make this thing a reality and help us to be able to keep it rolling. So thank you greatly for being an old guard and a channel legend, BC Skyman. And long live the Lee Spring Army, and we're on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Cody Wilson, who puts in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Cody, as well, for that support. And let's see here. He left, I believe, a super sticker as well. Let's see here. It was in the beginning. He left a super sticker of the YouTube Lemon Man throwing down a green thing and also hugging it. It loves the green thing a lot. The Lemon Man does. Thank you very much, Cody, for that support. And Enforcer, what say you?
And thank you so much, Cody, for the support. We got the green man throwing down the lemon thing. I don't know what that is even. Like,
got it backwards.
Man, we got the yellow man throwing down the green thing. Okay, so we got the lemon hugging the pea. Matthew, what the what the hell? It's just a pea.
Whoa, Jack.
Whoa! Whoa! Oh, what the YouTube's throwing in like YouTube did that, man. Because that is a pea. Like, look at it.
It could be.
Dude, it is.
Jack, don't get crazy on me.
Let me tell you something, Jack. Back in my day, we used to go on the pea. Look. Don't make me take you out back and beat you.
Got plenty of gas. Got plenty of it.
I gotta say that if someone threatens us over email, they're gonna get hurt. Maybe beyond that, I gotta thank you so much once again for the support, Cody Wilson, and helping this channel to keep on running. Because folks like you help to make us reality on air and help us to keep this channel running and help us to make this thing possible. And so thank you so much once again for support, Cody Wilson. You didn't throw in a comment, but the support means a lot. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here goes to Char G, who puts in a $20 donation. And Char G put in my favorite thing ever that he put in the super chat. And Char G put in the 20 and said, 2 mustard grilled In-N-Out cheeseburger combos, protein style. I don't even know what that is, but it sounds juicy. And for the boys, get some.
Man, Shargy said protein style. Man, that means extra meat. Like, extra meat in the boiga. Man, I'd have it. Like, I'd have it. I'd eat it. And I got to thank you so much, Shargy, once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. Because folks like you make this channel possible. And we love to know that you want us to eat the fine culinary tastes of In-N-Out Burger. I'll tell you something. We don't have an In-N-Out Burger around here, but maybe one day we'll travel to places that have In-N-Out Burger, like Texas. Oh, like, you know, something, Matthew, I was wondering, where in the world is In-N-Out Burger? In-N-Out Burger. Let me see here. Let me take a look. Locations. We want to find our locations. So, let's see here.
You know, they don't open up an In-N-Out Burger. This is what I've heard on the street, word on the street. They don't open up an In-N-Out Burger with franchisees, I think. I think the owner owns all of them. And so that's why the quality is so good, is because they make sure all the supply chain's in place properly before they open up somewhere, so they can ensure the quality is so consistent.
Dang, man, I was about to say, that's actually really cool. And sadly, there are no In-N-Out Burgers close to us. The closest ones appear to be in Arkansas. That's about the closest they get to us. Sadly, we wouldn't be able to get any access to them. And I was just wondering if there were any up in the north. Like, you know, up around Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota. I was just wondering if any of them were up there. Because who knows? Maybe we'll be able to have the fine taste of an In-N-Out Burger up in Minneapolis. And I'm sure, Matthew, it would be hard-fought burger. It would be one hell of a catch. I think it would be. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And thank you so much once again, Sharky, for the support. And thank you for supporting our little burger fund. So that way we can get ourselves some delicious burgers and make sure to be stacked up on that protein and stacked up on that energy. And so, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next super chat goes to that mom who puts in a $20 donation, and huge shout out to you, that mom, always for supporting the channel. And she says, call your family, call them. You never know how long you got them.
And call your family, folks. Really do it. You never know how long you have your family. Some people don't have families at all. Some people may not be in good relations with their families. And it's always important to make sure that you try and be as in good relations as possible as you can with your family, because you never know when they'll be gone. You never know when things might go south, and things might go south because you don't really talk to them much and they hardly know you. You may as well be a stranger to them. And so always make sure to call your family and let them know that you care about them and love them, and make sure to hang out with them a lot too, because all that means a lot. Those things mean a great deal, and it really does show when people care about you and want to talk to you and do things with you. And your family is one of the best things that you can have. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support that mom, and make sure everyone to call you mom. And thank you once again for supporting this channel and helping us to keep this thing running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing a reality. And so with that, we're on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here is going to go to Old Warrior, who threw in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Old Warrior, for your support as well. He said, from Newsweek, Putin propagandist falls for Mossad agent helicopter joke on live TV, and they're blaming him for the Iranian crash. And that is true, Old Warrior. I saw that video. It was our good old favorite Solyev on Russian propaganda TV. He was like, look, it's the Mossad agent helicopter. It took him down. And he was dead serious. And he even showed a clip of like somebody saying helicopter. Like that's the guy who allegedly took down the Iranian guy's plane or helicopter. But he fell for it. Big league. But Enforcer, what say you?
Helicopter, shagamonger, but beyond that, I did hear about that. Matthew and me heard about that, and it was a joke. It was a whole-on prank, even. Not by that guy. It was a prank on us on that guy, because he actually believed it. Because we actually were on this channel when someone said it was Eli Copter, and we're like, ha, good one. And then that guy went, it's real. He said, helicopter, he's real. It's like, no way he fell for it. And he did. That's kind of like those reporters that fell for the Air China crash thing. Y'all remember that here in America, where they were talking about, yep, we got the name in for the pilots. Something wrong. We too low. And they went through the whole thing, and then they got done reading it. And then someone finally said, you could hear it in the background. They're like, we were just had. Like we did on air one time, and they were like, oh. Well, we actually don't have the name of the pilots. We just read that off on it. It was like that, but on national Russian TV. And so now everyone in Russia probably believes that there is a Mossad agent actually called helicopter, until they come out and correct that later. But still, thank you so much once again for support and reminding us of that hilarious goof, because folks like you help to make this channel possible and help us to keep this thing running. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one. But really quickly, before we move on, I gotta move on to someone, Jussie Raltianen, who's going,
Jussie.
hello? Read the comments and stop talking, and they're going crazy down here.
Turn off those lights.
Turn off the TV. They hit the Pentagon. But beyond that, they're going crazy because they're trying to explain to me where Viet Cong comes from. And I saw it. Like, I can't read off every comment on air, Jussie. I just want to stop talking, damn it. I can't read off every guy. I don't know. No, don't get rid of him. Keep him. Like, keep him. I'm getting a laugh out of this.
I'll bring him back.
No, yeah, bring him back. That was just a short detainment right there. But beyond that, that's hilarious. They're just trying to explain where Viet Cong came from. And I read it, and I was like, oh, that's cool. Because apparently it's from a 1956 newspaper. And I was like, neat. And I was going to bring that up later if it ever came up. And then this person just starts going crazy in the live chat. I've never seen someone go crazy like that in a while. I'm getting a laugh out of that, actually. Because, Matthew, that would be like me sitting there, Matthew, going, you know, fun fact, Matthew, about the Chinese, and then I go through that, and then you go, wait a minute, hang on, I'm sorry, I was doing something, I didn't read. I'm like, stop doing shit, damn it, read, read, listen. It's like, oh man. But anyways, I read it and I saw it. It's just that I can't read every single live comment on air all the time. I just get
He's
to
trying
read.
to be a Looney Tunes voice actor out here.
Yeah.
Turn off those lights,
dude. I'm turning into Mel Blanc. I'm about to go quiet or something like that. But anyways, oh my lord. Anyways,
please stop. He stopped. Come back.
Oh, come back. Come on. We were having fun.
There's another guy called Jesse. He was wrapped up in the controversy.
He's still here.
Forget about that one.
Dude, he's still here. I just added him. He's still here. Like, I just don't like. Come on. Don't be a bad sport.
It's Jesse Smollett. Oh, it's Jesse.
Come on, we were all having a bit of fun. Come back. Come on. But anyways, Matthew, damn it, are you listening? We're on to the next one.
Turn off those lights. But anyways, moving on to our next super chat here. This one's from David Kendall, and he said nothing, and he put in a $10 donation. And thank you very much, David, for that support. We appreciate it very much. And of course, Enforcer, what say you?
David Kendall, why didn't you say nothing? Damn it! But beyond that, thank you for the support, David Kendall. I'm just kidding around with you. But I thank you massively for the support to help this channel keep on running. You didn't throw in a comment, but the support does help us to keep this channel running, and I thank you greatly for that. If it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to act like clowns after the news is over and get to joke around and talk with all of y'all, and I gotta greatly thank you for that, and thank you once again for enjoying this channel enough to find it worthwhile to support. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
I see people in the live chat trying to imitate the song. Baby, come back. Baby, come back. And you can blame it on Jesse. But anyways, moving on from that terrible impression, we're moving on to our next super chat. And this one goes to Tyler Morton, who puts in a 10. And says, do you think U.S. and Ukraine are lying about non-U.S. weapons allowed to hit Russian territory to trick them into bringing more equipment within artillery and ATACMS range for a surprise attack?
Good question, actually, and thank you for the support. And I would say that's possible because ruses are always a part of war, and everyone always has to remember that sometimes what's said in public and what's understood is not what it actually is. It's just what it seems. And so going off of that, that's entirely possible that this could be a ruse. But being entirely honest, I don't think it is. Because the United States does have a general, I guess you could say, lack of a want, I guess is the best way to put it, of trying to provoke and escalate conflicts with foreign countries, no matter who they are, including the Iranians and also the Russians. And so for that reason, I actually think that they're legitimate about not wanting to say, allow the Ukrainians to use our weapons in Russia. I think they're actually legitimately saying that, and that's not a ruse or a lie to try and throw off the Russian Federation. I think that's actually a legit thing that they're doing at the moment. But you never know. I mean, like throughout history, there's always been ruses conducted to throw people off. And so this could be a ruse. And it could be a very good one. It could be fooling me as well. But for now, I actually think that they're legitimately serious. And if it turns out that they're not legitimately serious about that in the future, and you were right that that the Ukraine and the US is lying about this to give us an upper hand on the Russians, then they did a pretty damn good job because they fooled me too. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that question incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and the next one goes to Rad Doctor, who puts in a 10 and says, if NATO were to sanction China for providing lethal aid to Russia, do you feel that would increase or decrease the likelihood of a Taiwan invasion?
I have a feeling that whether they give support to Russia or not, it's probably not going to affect a Taiwanese invasion, at least at the outset, because it would probably take several months of wearing down the Taiwanese to even get close to a ground invasion to where a lot of the lethal aid that China is sending to Russia would even be needed. So they would really have the time to mobilize war industry by the beginning of the war with Taiwan to the point that they actually conduct a ground invasion, in my opinion. And so for that reason, I don't really think it would affect that situation. Honestly, what would affect the situation more is the number of ships, the number of hulls that China is putting into the water, especially as far as transport ships go, transport ships or support ships go. That will be the most important determining factor on whether the Chinese will conduct a naval invasion of Taiwan. Because right now, it appears that they would not have the ability to conduct a naval invasion of Taiwan easily. There would be a lot of telltale signs that was coming for months, if not at least a year at the moment. So I think that's going to be the biggest determining factor at the moment about an invasion of Taiwan, rather than lethal aid support to the Russians. But that is still a really good question, because it could affect it, especially if they started to send Russia naval assets, such as vessels, that could actually start to massively affect the situation with Taiwan. It would probably postpone the invasion for quite some time. But from what we understand, they're not. It's mostly smaller munitions for ground equipment, and for that reason, we're highly doubting that it'll affect the ground invasion. Well, not the ground invasion, but a upcoming war with Taiwan, if that does happen. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And also, real quick, moving away from our super chats for just a moment, I saw a live chat question here from Southern Stables Automotive. He said, Matthew, take a moment to tell us what you see in the next year of Europe. And on that question, Southern Stables, like, honestly, there's really not much to it, in my opinion. The fighting is going to remain limited to Ukraine. And honestly, the fighting in Ukraine is probably going to go on for probably a couple years, in my opinion. It's still got a couple years left on it. I really do not see it ending by the end of the year. Unless Ukraine's able to cripple Russia's economy and collapse the entire country by the end of the year, it'll probably continue on into 2025, probably mid to end 2025, and then we'll have to reassess it from there. But I don't see, me personally, I don't see the fighting in Ukraine spreading to NATO countries, at least not right now, because Russia is struggling to fight the war in Ukraine. So, like, for example, even the threat that Russia made to take the territorial waters of Finland and Lithuania, they backed off of that very quick because they realized, that didn't go over too well. The West looks like they're getting very militant about that, and that could go sideways. Then they backed off of it and totally forgot about it. So it's going to stay limited. But Enforcer, what do you think?
I would have to say that, in my opinion, over the next year in Europe, things are going to remain probably very similar. No borders will change. The war in Ukraine, if it's still going on, will still be in Ukraine. To be quite honest, it would be the exact same things that Matthew said, so there's no point in rehashing the whole thing. I would largely agree with what Matthew said on that. His analysis on that is pretty spot on, in my opinion. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And also, Matthew, did you see that Fidel Castro came back from the grave to be in this live chat? Did you see that?
Chip Tooth.
Yeah,
what?
Chip Tooth Tony with a profile picture of Fidel Castro. Oh my lord. I was like, Castro? Is that you? I was like, no way. I was like, Castro, he's here. Hey, how's your
Isn't
son?
that like an honor to be called fake news by Castro? That's like a journalist's honor.
Yeah, I mean, hell, like, dude, you Castro, like, dude, being called fake news by Castro, high honor right there. And also, why in the world would I care about being called fake news by someone with a Castro profile pic? That's like having a profile pic at Hitler. Like, it's like, do I really care what their opinion is? Nah, not really. I'm a little too mentally balanced for that. Sorry, but better luck next time. If you send in a picture of, I don't know, Teddy Roosevelt, I'll actually be heartbroken. I'll be like, no, Teddy, no. Like, I'll be like, don't hate me. But anyways, with that, hope that does address that the best I can. Oh, wait, what, Matthew? What are you laughing at?
Oh no, I can't repeat it. It's something somebody said in the chat.
Wait, is it from Jaka?
No, I cannot repeat it. Like, I cannot say that out loud.
Hold up. Let's see, hang on. I gotta look for it now.
Just leave it be, man. You can't repeat it either. You're gonna get us in trouble.
I can't even see it. Like, I don't see it, so I can't even read it off. But anyways,
there.
I'm looking.
Just leave it be, man.
Email me. Like, text me about this. Where is it? I gotta see it.
I mean, I'll have to tell you about it later, man. I know you want to tell you. I want to put it in your mind. You might end up repeating it.
All right. Fair enough. Apparently, it's a weapon of mass destruction. I can't see it. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
So our next one here goes to AK Smithy, who puts in a $10 donation. It says the term Viet Cong appeared in Saigon newspapers beginning in the 1956, and it is a contraction of Vietnam Cong, and meaning Vietnam Communists.
And AK Smithy, you threw in the exact same thing that Jossie guy threw in. And then he was like, read, damn it, read! He was like going off, and I was like, man, what the hell? Like, thank you for the support, though, and sharing that with me, because that is incredibly cool and incredibly interesting, because I never actually knew where it came from. And apparently, it must just be a Vietnamese communist. That's what it is short for. So Viet Cong, Vietnamese communist. And so with that, thank you so much for the support. And interestingly enough, that actually started in the Eisenhower administration. The Eisenhower administration, man, your favorite president from history. Impressive, I have to say.
I must say that Eisenhower was a great president. I like when the presidents talk like that back in the day. Like they talked like they were really, really like high strung. I like that.
Wait, no, wait. Have you ever heard Eisenhower talk before?
Yeah, I've heard him.
Are you sure you got him right? Because he was like a very frank-sounding guy. He was like, when you hire a bus driver and he drives the bus into a ditch, you don't say he has well intentions. You hire a new bus driver. And I was like, wait a minute, he talks like that? Like Patton was like a squeaker, but like Eisenhower talks like he was like an automated machine. Let me see if I can go get that Eisenhower campaign ad. Eisenhower campaign ad.
But you know, like even Eisenhower and all the old presidents spoke in that certain way. Like they don't speak anymore. Like you wouldn't have heard Eisenhower or like anybody like that going, "Oh, Jack, whoa."
So really, you gotta play it. Dude, imagine Eisenhower getting up there. Well, no, better yet, JFK getting up there and going, "Oh, look! Wait, what? Nuclear missiles! Cuba! Cigars!" Like, it would be like, oh, no.
Back in those days, it would have been literally people, like, shouting like the guy was in the chat, "Sit down!" It would be literally about,
can you hear the crowd? They don't like you. But anyways, or better yet, Cuba, terrible people. You'd be like, oh, that's tough. It'd be like, oh, my God, we're doomed. Like, we're going to get nuked tomorrow. Like, by either. But anyways, really quickly, let me let y'all hear Eisenhower, because he actually had a very interesting way of talking. So here it is. And let me skip forward to the part where he talks, because it's actually really short. But this is how he talked in every single audio recording.
Yes, my Mamie gets after me about the high cost of living. It's another reason why I say it's time for a change. Time to get back to an honest dollar and an honest dollar's worth.
Like, what the, like, I don't know if he just, like, enunciated his words like that for recording, or if he just talked like that. But I'm not gonna lie, Eisenhower kind of
honest dollar work. Like that's like something we need.
it's dude. He talked in very simple terms back then. He was like, "You want jobs?" Like it was like that. He was like, "Hi, would you like a job?" It's like, yeah. It's like, sure. Like
that's what I liked about the guy. He was just like straightforward. He didn't go around in BS political circles. He just literally said it how it was because he was an ex-military man. That's who he was. So that guy knew how to get stuff done, and he did. Like he was if he ran today, if Eisenhower ran today, he would not win because he ran on common sense. And the guy got stuff done at the ground level, and you know that doesn't work anymore.
And yeah, it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't work on any side because, of course, we have to make sure to remain within our no politics rules, so we have to cross this across the board. But it's not like that anymore. It's all emotional. It's all emotional appeals. There's no logical appeal anymore in politics, and that's also why we avoid it because emotional appeals are very emotional people end up being really violent people. Like that's the best way to put it. So whenever you run into anyone who's really political, you can just know they're most likely pretty violent people. Like there's no other way for me to put it. I know some people are gonna, what do you mean? Like, listen, we've running this YouTube channel for 819 days. We have found that the most political people on both sides who think that we're not their political leaning, because we don't get into that on air, and it's been from both sides, are the most violent people that we've ever run across. So for me, that's a fact of life. It's not really an opinion. But emotions are one of the worst things to bring into politics, in my opinion. Oh my God. If people would stop doing that, I think it would be a lot better of a place. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And if you want a political campaign run on facts and logical conclusions, make sure to vote for me, Enforcer, for president in 2040. But with that, we are on to the next one.
Man, at this point, if like a candidate came out and said, "You see that pothole in the road? Well, just fix the damn thing." I'd be like, vote for that man. Vote for him.
Someone
right
vote
now.
this man in.
I don't need all that fancy talk. I just want that. Like, I'd vote for that in a second. But anyways, moving on here to our next super chat. We have a $50 donation from Andy L. Longtime channel legend, and thank you very much, Andy, for that very generous support. He said, "Good night, guys, and I'll be gone for a few days on a hunt." Oh, and I'm sure he's bringing the big guns out. He said, "See you when I get back. and be safety. And please take a question from the live chat.
And thank you so much for the support, Andy L. And we will be safety. And I got to thank you so much once again for helping this channel to keep on running. And I hope you have a fun hunting trip. You and BC Scamming are like our hunters on the channel. And I hope y'all are having a fun time out there whenever y'all go on the hunting trips. Both of y'all were here actually tonight, which is really cool. And I hope that y'all are having a fun time out on those hunting trips. Tell us what you're able to get when you go out there, because I'd like to know what you're hunting and what you ended up bringing home. And I hope that you have an incredibly fun time with it. I've never personally gone hunting myself. Everyone where we grew up, though, they all hunted. And some of them actually invited us out. Well, I know I personally got invited out. I don't know about Matthew because he was like a grade above me, so I didn't get to see what he was dealing with. But I got invited a couple of times by other kids to go hunting with them. I never did because my parents didn't want me to go hunting. They were like, "You're killing an animal," and I was like, "Oh, come on!" Like, you know, it would be kind of, I guess, kind of fun. And so I never went hunting. But I've always been a little interested in it, and always thought that it must be fun because a lot of people still do it. And so I hope you have the best of luck out there. I hope you catch something amazing, and hopefully something pretty tasty, too, if you're planning on eating it. Or if it's a trophy animal, I just hope it looks good. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, because folks like you make it possible and have a great deal of fun. If you're taking that giant heavyweight rifle out there, God bless your arms. But still, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that the best we possibly can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one is going to go to John Person, who puts in a $10 donation. And thank you, John, very much as well. He says, "Thank you, enforcers, and please take an all-caps rant from the chat."
And thank you. And thank you so much, damn it! Can you read? Can you read? Dude, that's the way we need to start dealing with our haters, man. We just need to be unhinged. Like what they said they would say, "His analysis is bad." What analysis? The only thing that has anal in it is you because you're an asshole or something like that. You know, we just need to start
then we'd be accused of being, oh, they're abusers too.
Oh yeah, we would be bullies or something like that. You know, like it would be something. But man, man, imagine if we actually just did that, like just out of the blue, or better yet, we just hung out in someone's comment section and just started harassing everyone who commented on something. Like, that would be crazy, like legitimately crazy. I can't even put that into words how crazy that would be. Like, imagine. Like, it's just imagine. Let me see if I can go get that meme, because imagine meme. Dang it. Dang, man, they don't have it. I was wanting to show you the specific meme. It's like, imagine. But beyond that, I can't find it.
Wouldn't you just like to like have a meltdown, like when anybody ever like yaps about you a little too much and stuff like that, like comes and harasses you and stuff like that and doxes you? Wouldn't you just love to like have a meltdown? You know, it's like create a stream talking about rant streaming crazy and just go berserk. You know, there's actually a guy out there that used to do that. I don't know where he went. He's gone now, totally missing from YouTube and everything. But there was a guy that used to get on here and yell like that. He would go, I can't repeat the word, but he would go something like, "You crackhead," and he would say that over and over and over, and he would just yell it, a different word actually, the worst one, and he'd yell it over and over and over and rant about how everybody's attacking him, about how the government's coming to get him, and all of a sudden the dude went missing. I don't know where the hell he went because I don't see him anywhere. But anyways. You know, it's just crazy, man. We need a rant stream.
We do. Well, like, we honestly, you know what, Matthew? When Christmas starts coming around, we need to do Festivus for the rest of us and just get on here and just start yelling about everything. Like, just go crazy. And Super Creech said, Chris Farley, down by the river. Like, that was a pretty good one. But I gotta say, you know, it feels nice. And Jackie said, "Yeah, crack it." No, if you heard the real one, it was actually the D word, the D head word. Yeah. Like, it was that one. It was so funny because it was the same emphasis on it every time. Like, the guy would be like, "What the hell do you mean, you crackhead?" Something like that every time.
Here's the template. It would be, "You crackhead," and then it would be a very perverse sexual comment, wacko comment, and then it would be, They're lying. You crackhead.
Yeah,
and he do that like
did the
on loop,
same
like
thing.
over and over and over. The dude was a freaking nut.
Dude, it was like the Italians in World War II on the radio. Like the propaganda segment would come on, and and in Germany, like I will give it to them. They had a pretty good like propaganda department that like tried to come up with like logical talking points, if you could call it that. But then in Italy, it was just literally "Viva il Duce!" It's like just that over and over and over for like 15 minutes. It's like that's not like who in the world is going to listen to this? Like that's or better yet, the people who listen to, oh man, that is something right there. Oh my goodness, low energy on a show. That is something right there that I'll be entirely honest. Ooh, gets tiresome on the nerves. And what's even worse is when they're like a 5'5" manlet. I hate to say it. Like everyone else who's 5'5"
Nothing wrong
and
with
below,
short people.
like
though.
nothing wrong with y'all. Just wrong with this one small person in particular. This person who's size challenged. This one person. This one person. Goodness gracious. The things
Not
they
that there's
say.
anything wrong with that or anything.
Not that there's anything wrong with it. Not that there's anything wrong with anything at all. Like everything's fine. Everything's fine. But if nothing was fine, I would say that kind of stuff just pisses me off or really grinds the gears. Not in a way to get me angry on a show or angry at anyone in particular, but angry enough that if I ever saw this person, it would not end well. So luckily they're not around here, and luckily they don't show up. But wait a minute, are they back?
I thought they were back. Somebody
Here
said
they
they're
are.
back.
They said
Wait,
I'm always
where are
here.
they?
Yeah, they said it. They're back. Hey, well,
Wait, where? I don't see them.
let's
Let me
see. They're up there.
Oh yeah, I'm always here. It's like, listen, bro. If you were always here, you wouldn't be saying that because we literally do the same routine every night. It's not like it's anything new.
Yeah,
It's like he's going berserk for the first time ever. He just snapped tonight.
Can you read? Stop talking, damn it, and read. But I find that funny. Like, to be quite honest with you, usually that kind of rudeness would be bannable. But that was so funny, you will stay. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least in my opinion. But still, thank you so much for the support. Thank you for letting us get another all caps from the live chat. And also, Matthew, speaking of which, that was an invitation for a live chat. And so, what do we got, Matthew?
The live chat question goes to Steve Z's, who says, how many A-10s to take back Ukraine?
Well, if you knew, dude, I'm gonna be on that all night, like just trying to scream. People are gonna be like, "Turn it down!" But I'm sorry, y'all. But beyond that, to answer that question, I have no idea how many A-10s it would take. I would say if we were to send them a ballpark number, maybe 50. That's quite a lot actually, and it would take a lot of time to train those pilots. But with A-10s, I just feel like they're going to be limited effective. A limited level of effectiveness. And you can go through all the analysis. People can agree or disagree with me. I know people are going to be dead set on the A-10 because the A-10 is not about logic, it's about emotions. It's about what do you like? Do you like the A-10? Are you indifferent about it, or do you not like it? So that pretty much determines your opinion on the A-10, unlike every other weapon system where it's actually measured as effective or not. So I would say 50 of them and see how it goes, and if they go poorly, never send another, and if they go well, send more. That's what I would say. And so with that, thank you so much once again for sponsoring that live chat. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And also, I saw Wisconsin bring it up in the live chat. My favorite old phrase I used on a particular someone. You'll do as you're told. And he will. He will do as he's told. And I want to make a bet on that. He'll do what he's told. But anyways, jumping into our next super chat here, we have one from Duncan VR, the channel legend.
No way.
And he threw in a $12 donation. Duncan is back. And he says, Bamu quack. Stop talking. He said, oh, man. Hot dog man, oh, moo is begging for the LSA members. Oh, the fly said, Guzelievelaken. Oh, man, oink, ba. Let's bring out Alan the Marmot for the hot dog fund.
Who? I thank you for the support, Duncan VR, and thank you for supporting this channel and helping us to keep this thing running, but who is that even? Like, I don't even know who they are. Sounds like a dying YouTube channel to me. That's what it sounds like. Or better yet,
Sounds reminiscent.
It sounds like something I've heard of. It sounds like something, but I mean, it's just so hard to remember because from what I know, they're so forgettable. Like, I
You'll
Duncan,
do as you're told.
I hate to tell you, but the joke is falling flat because I don't even know who the hell that person is. Like, what? Like,
You'll
what?
do as you're told.
You do what you're told. Oh man. But beyond that, Duncan VR, all jokes aside, thank you so much for the massive support and helping this channel to keep on running. And Duncan VR had to clarify. I'm just kidding with you. I know who it is. But I got to thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And that's what I heard today. I don't even care to look because who cares? Well, who cares? Like some of y'all care, and I thank y'all for that. And I thank y'all for caring about us enough that y'all will care about that. But for me, it's who cares? I mean, the Lee Spring Army never dies. It never will die. No matter what people say, no matter what people do, this guy has been at it for a year and a half. So. It's not going to change anytime soon. But, one thing, jaw lines will change, but it will not be ours. I will say that. Jaw lines will be changing, but it will not be ours. I'm
telling you what, my jawline is so chiseled and defined. Not really,
Man.
though. It's decent, but who cares about that anyway? My jaw's strong enough. It's strong enough to make someone do what they're told.
Man, I'll tell you what, man. I got enough fat around my jaw. It will buffer any punch. Oh man, it's got like explosive reactive armor up here. Like you punch that, you gotta get through at least 3 layers. But oh man, I'm telling you,
it's been a solid. Let me tell you something, man. It's been a solid minute since I was scrapping, man. It's been a solid minute. You remember, me and you used to scrap back in the day. Like you've always had a little bit of a size advantage on me, but even me and you used to scrap back in the day and stuff like that. It's been a good minute since we've scrapped.
Man,
I'm not gonna lie.
It's been a good minute since a hoedown, but the hoedowns used to be real. I mean, it was like fists flying, people getting picked up, thrown around. I mean, it was like that. Let me think here. Oh. Man, it was tough thinking about it because there were fights you would win, there was fights I'd win, but every single one of them was ugly. And also, by the way, if y'all are wondering, no, none of those have happened recently. I think the last fight Matthew and me had, an actual physical fight, hell, 8-9 years ago, something like that. It was a long time ago. But hey, we'd be more than happy to scrappy do. But something that is so cool, that's so interesting, are these cool things. There are these incredible things that completely remove the fight from the equation, especially on the self-defense metric. And they're just so interesting. But that's all I'm gonna say on that. It's just that will there honestly I'd like to keep my streak of not getting into a scrap. And I'd like to keep it at 9 years and keep it going to 10, to be quite honest with y'all. But that doesn't mean I'm gonna back away from anything. No, but stand your ground laws exist for a reason, folks. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well. And I thank you so much once again for the support, Duncan VR, and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next, we have a $20 super chat from Aaron, LSA, who's been around for a very long time. And thank you very much, Aaron, for that $20 support. And he says, a hot dog for both of you. Ha, 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 ha. And I like my hot dog with extra salt, you know what I mean? He said, I watched the video today, and it was so sad. So sad. Take one from the chat.
Aaron, what video are you talking about? I must be in the dark about something, because I've watched plenty of videos, usually a lot of documentary videos, but the one you're talking about that's so sad, I haven't even heard of it. But I do
he's
think
he's talking about that video. Shit, I can't remember the name of the channel, but he's talking about that video of the tutorial on how to make hot dogs saltier. I think.
Dude, I think he's talking about that YouTube video that is like a deep dive documentary into what failing YouTube channels do when they aren't getting anywhere anyway else, and they have to find some way to recover, so they end up riding on some other channel's coattails. I think that's the kind of genre of video you're talking about, Aaron LSA. And I gotta say, isn't that such a sad category of video? Why can't people do their own things? Why can't people just cover the news? Spending so much time and effort on something that's completely non sequitur, possibly, well, actually not possibly, certainly conducting some federal felonies, or at least federal criminal charges in the past.
Federal felonies. I'm not gonna lie, federal felonies. I've never heard that term before.
I haven't
Federal
either.
felonies.
I was trying to come up with one off the top of my head. I was like, you know what, we're going to slide with that one, but that's not the correct term. But beyond that, all these things, all these crazy things, Aaron, and for what? For what? It's for nothing. But yeah, it's tough. And War Dog said, "Here we go." And no, actually no. Because it's not even worth our time really to address. It's something hilarious though, and I see that a lot of y'all have gotten a laugh out of it as well. But we're not going into any deep address on that. But still, thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, Aaron. And thank you for giving a hot dog to both of us. And so with that, Matthew, send it to the live chat.
All right, so moving on to our live chat question here, we're actually going to circle back to a super chat from Duncan VR. We did not grab the marmot.
What? Wait a minute. What? Wait a minute. We heard marmot, and I didn't even pick up on it. The hell?
Bring him back.
Bring it back. We gotta bring that boy back. We gotta bring back Alan the marmot. Oh, hello there. Look at the marmot, damn it.
Hello there. Could I do in 1 kilo of raw?
Or could I interest you in a pipe, but not one for smoking tobacco? Oh,
Would you
man.
like a plum?
Would you like a plum? Or would you like a plum up your ass? But beyond that, it is Alan the Marmot. And I gotta thank you so much for the support, Duncan VR, and allowing us to see this precious marmot. And I gotta say, this marmot is something else. It's a symbol of the channel. It's a symbol of the Lee Spring Army, and it's beautiful to see this little creature here. We all love this little creature so much. It's such a quirky little animal, and it's got that cake. No one can deny it's got that cake. But beyond that, something else that's really interesting is we've heard that there's word from the fly. Matthew, what are the words from the fly?
Oh man, I'm telling you what, I'm gonna put the 1-2 on you. I'm gonna put the 1-2. I'm gonna go.
The fly then croaked. You'll do what you'll tell. Oh my god, man! Like, hang on, let me do my turn on the fly. Aw, man, I'm 5'5", but I act like I could beat up 2 dudes that are 6'2" and 6'3". Aw, man, I'm the up-and-coming Steven Seagal. Aw, man, come on down to Alabama. Aw, man, do it, no balls. Aw, man.
Alabama.
Oh man, the banjos will be playing hard. But beyond that, I gotta say, thank you so much for the support, Aaron. Well, wait, hang on, no, Duncan, damn it, I'm sorry. But thank you so much once again for support, Duncan, and helping this channel to keep on running, because the marmot compels us. And if it wasn't for us having this marmot, what would this channel be? It would be less fun. It would be less colorful. It would have less culture. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Mark Anthony, who puts in a 5 and says no caffeine for the enforcer, LOL. And Mark Anthony, he had caffeine again once again, but if you're following our Patreon, which I think Mark might be actually, you'll see that we got, or at least I got, a new coffee pot, a Nespresso machine, and that's what I'm now using for the coffee, and it's working damn swell.
You put that on the Patreon? Like,
yeah, I'm running out of stuff to post on the Patreon, so I was like, let me post a picture of this coffee pot that I got, since I was called the Enforcer Energy Juice Machine, or something like that, and then I put that on the title to make it all cheeky and everything, but the Enforcer has not had one of those yet, but it's working very swell for me. As you can tell, I am like so buzzing tonight, it's not even funny. More alert than I've been in years, actually, from that. But Enforcer, what say you?
Yes, that's true. I can back that up. No offense. He's actually energetic, and I like Matthew being a lot more energetic on stream than not. But like, it adds so much, and it makes it so much easier for me to do my thing. But to talk about the Nespresso thing, I've had a sip of it. It's actually really good. It's like I just to key y'all in really quickly, I actually drink coffee with no sugar, no sweeteners, no cream. It's just like straight coffee, and usually just straight cold brew. So when I had the espresso, and it was like it like foams it and everything, I had a little sip. It was actually really good. Like it was bitter, but you start to understand that bitters are a own flavor genre of their own, and bitters are good. And so I thought it was actually really good. It's just that I haven't had a whole cup yet because it's only 100 milligrams of coffee, and I usually drink somewhere in between 200 to 250 before running the show. So you know that's something I was like, I would need 2 espressos to be able to get the amount of caffeine I need. So with that, thank you for the support. But sadly, no, like no one took the caffeine away from me. I'm still out here like just freaking chugging caffeine. Like it has to be. But only at this time of day. Like I only drink coffee once a day, and it's right before the show. Beyond that, I function fine. Like I'm like a full energy like this. It's just that the coffee makes sure that I keep my full energy well into the night, like past midnight like it is right now. And so with that, I hope that does address that well, and I thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, huge shout out to Wyatt Logan, who put in a $2 donation. He said, proud LSA member and no more hot dogs. Thank you, Wyatt, for the support. And Enforcer, what say you?
Oh, well, I thank you so much for the support, Wyatt Logan. And I'd say there's no more hot dogs, but sadly, there is nothing but hot dogs. We just can't get rid of them. No matter what we do, what we end up turning out with the hot dogs, whether it be hot dog marmalade or hot dog roast, they just keep coming back, and it's just so interesting. And they keep coming back more bitter and salty than the last batch, and I just don't understand, Wyatt Logan. I just don't understand. But you know, something that's a-okay with me, something that's fine. Some of these hot dogs are a little spicy, and sometimes you got to remove the spice from them. And if anyone ever wants us to remove spice from their hot dog, or a hot dog gets spice removed from it, come on down. Everyone knows where we live. We've been doxxed enough times. Come on down. We'd like to help you remove your spice. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. Thank you so much for the support, Wyatt Logan, and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we're on to the next one.
All right, and the last one goes to Chris, who puts in a 1. And thank you very much, Chris, for that support as well, and no comment to address, but of course, we appreciate it very much. And with that, we're now moving on from our super chats to our live chat questions. And once again, thank you to everyone for helping support the channel tonight, and we appreciate it very much. And of course, up first, we had the Morse code decoders of the stream. Tonight, it was Cliff Simonson, Mark Hodges, Earl Bernew, Paul Schultz, Kevin J., Rumpelstiltskin, David Millsaps, and Toxic Bananas. They said, Enforcer, the LSA Core Morse code decipher says, Russia is losing another major campaign just like that. Ukraine is not yet lost. Slava Ukraine. Long live the LSA.
And that is the sound of money. And y'all got it right. Y'all got it right dead on the nail. Y'all can read. But beyond that, congratulations to y'all for getting that Morse code message correct. It was the 819th Morse code message on this channel, and y'all got it dead on the nail. That is very impressive of y'all. And I gotta say that it's cool to know that we have people in here who have that kind of skill, who can listen to Morse code and actually understand it, because that is really cool that we've kept y'all around for so long, and everyone's able to keep on hearing what the Morse code message is. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we're now moving on into our live chats, and we're going to try and answer live chats for about the next 10 minutes, and then we're going to be rounding out the stream. And also, I'm going to be trying to answer, because I want to make sure that we get to as many of them as possible, so I'm going to cut down a lot of the extra statements that I make, and I'm going to answer them a little bit quicker, so that way I can get to more of y'all and make sure to answer more questions. And so with that, we are on to the first one.
And the first one goes to Trench Mouse, who says, what is the current status of Mr. Lunchtime?
Mr. Lunchtime went missing in action a long time ago in the war. We've never seen Mr. Lunchtime again. We don't know if he's alive or dead. So right now, he is Schrodinger's Mr. Lunchtime. He could be alive, he could be dead. We don't really know. But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and we have a question from Jaka, who says, what do you think about Sea Baby, and what impact the new weapon could help Ukraine?
The Sea Baby is actually a revolutionary weapon. Naval drones of that kind have never really been seen before, especially on the scale, and the kind of impact that they're having to the Russian Navy and also Russian maritime traffic is significant. It is probably going to be a weapon of the future that a lot of people invest in, because it doesn't really seem at the moment that there's really a lot of defenses to these small Sea Baby drones. So I would say it's certainly the future of really naval warfare, best way to put it. And so with that, I hope that, well, at least coastal naval warfare like we're seeing right now. But with that, I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the next one.
And this one is going to go to Eugene Minton, who said, wouldn't it, meaning the USSR's collapse, be a precursor for the CCP to potentially invade the east of Russia?
The Chinese Communist Party. So the collapse of the Russian Federation would probably not be a precursor to a Chinese invasion of Russia. I don't think the Chinese would want to take on that land just because of the administrative costs, because they already get the resources just the resources as cheap as they want already, but they don't have to actually maintain or govern that land, which is a huge plus for them. So I have a feeling they actually wouldn't want to take that land, in my opinion, but I could be wrong. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and this time we have a super chat once more. This one's from CK Bold, the regular, who puts in a 5. And thank you very much, CK, as always, for the very generous support. He says, donating only night note. And what does that mean, CK Bold? I don't know. I'm used to the number 5. What happened?
What? CK Bold. But you always say the same thing. Take a live chat. But what do we do, Matthew? What do we listen? Damn it! What do we do? It's like I don't know, but still, thank you for the support, CK Bolt, and thank you for helping this channel to keep on running. And I hope we were able to address that the best we can. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And CK Bold doesn't even have a choice. We're moving back to the live chat, and we'll get this one in honor of CK Bold. And this one goes to Buns, who says, don't you think that Russia would consider the collapse an existential threat and therefore would explore using nuclear weapons?
They possibly could, but when the Soviet Union collapsed, it wasn't really considered an existential crisis to the state. But that was kind of a special circumstance for what happened with Gorbachev and the collapse of the Soviet Union. This is actually a faction that was challenging his power and threatening to oust him, which is what led to the collapse of the Soviet Union in its entirety. So I don't really know how it would happen now, but going off of the Soviet standard that was laid out, it wouldn't lead to the use of nuclear weapons, but it certainly would throw up the question of nuclear security a lot around the world, not just inside of Russia, but inside of really every developed first, second, or third world country out there. And also, by the way, a lot of people don't know this. I will go into a rabbit hole a little bit about this. First, second, and third world are some people are just really ignorant with this. And this is something that I found really annoying, because back when I was in high school, growing up, they were like, you can't say third world, it's offensive, it's a derogatory term. It's actually not. First world were all the countries in the Western sphere, like with the United States. So Team USA is first world. Second world was Team Commie. So anyone who was a communist was in the second world. So that included the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Soviet Union, all of them, and also the Mongolians for a bit. And then third world was everyone who wasn't on Team USA directly, or Team Soviet Union, or Team Commie directly. Everyone else just fell on the third world, no matter their economic status or progress. So if, like, say Austria, funnily enough, is technically third world, because they were on Team Nobody for a good bit, which is kind of interesting. But anyways, with that, I hope that, and also Brazil is third world, although Brazil really isn't third world. Like, especially in the Cold War, they were nowhere close to third world. They were actually one of the most prosperous economically in South America, as well as Venezuela, Colombia. Really, everyone in South America was pretty economically prosperous at the time. Things have kind of changed a little bit for some of them, but they were all technically considered third world as well. It's just that nowadays, because usually the folks who fell in Team Nobody were kind of like insignificant enough to fall under the radar. Usually a lot of them weren't that economically well off, so then a lot of people started to pretty much correlate third world with being a crappy country, but that's not what it actually means. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least that little historical rabbit hole, just because I had to do one, but we're on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here is going to go to Jaka yet again, who says, Russia just had lunch. Hold on.
What they eat?
Let's see. I'm like, wait a minute, what? I think they meant to say Russia just launched a space weapon, and what do you think about this? Is it a bluff? Do you know about it?
I actually would have to declare ignorance on that one. I don't know about the
So,
space weapon.
so Russia, apparently, from what I heard, launched a space satellite that has the ability to interfere with other satellites and actually sabotage them. And I think physically, I think that's the way I understood it. I don't know if that sounds ignorant or not. Maybe that may be the way it works or not. But it's a satellite that'll mess with our satellites and it can attack them.
I mean, that's that
What do you
nuclear
think about
satellite
that?
they were talking about a while ago, right? Like the one that would send out like some sort of a pulse, I believe.
I don't know. I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I feel like I'm on the wrong path here with this. I know it's an attack satellite, but I think they meant I don't think they meant an EMP.
It is that nuclear thing that we were hearing about a
Okay.
while ago. So yes, that is that thing. We have heard about that a while ago. That's not a bluff. That's a real deal, and that's a part of Russia's doctrine of orbital warfare, which, unlike the United States, where we would specifically target and knock out satellites, the Russians would just say screw it and pretty much knock out everyone's satellite access all at one time. So it's not a bluff, it's a real deal, and it's one of the stupidest orbital warfare doctrines that I've ever heard of or ever seen, compared to the US or the Chinese orbital warfare doctrines, which are actually pinpoint accurate with the kind of impact that they would have. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to I Am Gift Bearer, who says, when are the fighter jets due to arrive for Ukraine? And do you think Russia's launching this offensive to get in a few licks before the planes arrive?
I think it may be that they're trying to get in a few licks before the planes will arrive. But from what we understand, the jets should be arriving any day now or by the early part of June. So it is very close that we will see F-16s finally in Ukraine. We probably won't see them in action until late June or early July, though. But they will be in Ukraine here probably within days or just a few weeks. And so with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next question goes to W13RD guy, who says, who lives in the Donbass? And has Russia deported all the Ukrainians from there and replaced them with the Russians?
Interesting question, actually, because they haven't really deported a lot of people who live in the Donbass. Funnily enough, majority of the population living in the Donbass was actually Russian speaking. And also largely were from Russia. Like they were kind of ethnically and culturally Russians. And that's what the Russians used as a justification to invade the Donbass, really to occupy the Donbass back in 2014, is because there was a lot of Russians there. But the thing is, with that, is that those Russians historically were not there. Like, they only arrived, I believe, in the 1930s and 40s, because in the 1930s and 40s, this area rapidly industrialized because of Stalin's 5-year plans, which were ways that the Soviet Union was supposed to become viable and an actual world power, industrially compared to everyone else in the world. So Stalin actually went out of his way to massively industrialize the Donbass, including Donetsk and Luhansk. And so a lot of Russians ended up being moved into this part of Ukraine to be a part of that massive, pretty much urban sprawl that was beginning to happen, and also the massive industrialization and urbanization of the area that was happening. And that's where a lot of these major cities in the Donbass come from. They're all mining cities, or at least were revolving around the mining industry or the metallurgical industry, just like Mariupol, where the Azovstal metallurgical plant is. So I hope that does address that well, because that's kind of what things were like down there. There was actually a lot of Russians down there, more Russians in the Donbass than Ukrainians. But I hope that does address that well, because from what we understand, there have been deportations, a decent amount of them, but it's not that the entire population has been replaced, because in reality, a decent amount of those people were cross-compatible with the Russians in the first place, which made invading and occupying that area a little bit easier than it would have been. Unlike Zaporizhia and Kherson, where there is a very strong resistance movement, in Donetsk and Luhansk, there is resistance movements, but from what we can even tell, they're not as active as the ones in Zaporizhia or Kherson. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the second to last question of the night.
And this one goes to, let's see here. This one is going to go to Eugene Minton, who says, would increasing tariffs work better than sanctions against the China and CCP occupied?
It kind of would. It kind of does the same thing as sanctions in the sense, because that is actually a form of a sanction. But you could do that. It's just that it would probably impact U.S. consumer prices, because now it's going to be more expensive for them to get their goods from China. So really, while they may end up trying to send their trade elsewhere, it probably would just end up affecting the United States more so. So I think we would actually have to go with some stronger sanctions than just tariff increases. But that is a good question, and maybe I'm not I will be quite honest. I don't understand tariffs as well as anything else, so I'll have to look into that a little bit more. But my answer would be tariffs may not be the best option, but I don't think they're an incredibly bad one. It's just that there will be a chance of a decent amount of damage being caused to the U.S. economy in turn doing that. But with that, I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the final question of the night. And so, who was the lucky last person who threw in the lucky last question of the night?
And that viewer is Don C., who says, why doesn't the West just teach Ukraine how to make their own long-range missiles? It seems like a really simple workaround.
We could teach them how to do that, but the problem is that they don't have the resources, and also to create those kinds of missiles, it requires special kind of machining parts and also different kinds of factory components. And those are usually the most expensive things in manufacturing a missile. That's actually what makes cars expensive, funnily enough, is that special machines have to be made to build the engine blocks, the frames, and everything else for every single car model. And that's why car models don't really change that much from design iteration to design iteration. Usually it's something kind of superficial, kind of on the aesthetic side. That's why the BMW M3, as an example, its body shape hasn't really changed that much in between the last design and this one. Changed a little, sure, and that requires a little bit of tweaking in the machines, but that's a lot cheaper than creating a completely different body design, a completely different frame, which can end up being expensive. Although it can also end up being a trendsetter as well, because a lot of the trends and styles in the past came from very rapid or major body changes, but that's a part of designed obsolescence and everything else, which is a huge thing in the automotive industry that pushes sales. But beyond that, moving on from that, trying to figure out the best way to answer that, they could try and teach them how to make missiles. The problem is they wouldn't have the money to do it, and they also wouldn't have the machining abilities to do that either easily. We would have to also send all of that to them, and at that point, that is so expensive, we may as well have just built the missiles for them and then shipped them over there, and kept all of that here in the United States where it would be safe and not end up possibly getting blown up in the future. But with that, and David A., you are late. Like, we are actually rounding out the stream right now. You're like, oh my god, I'm so late. Hello, but we're gone now, David. Like, it's the end. I'm sorry, you missed the whole thing. But with that, we have reached the end of tonight's stream. I got to thank all of y'all so much once again for watching and enjoying this channel. So far, this is absolutely insane. 8.1 thousand people were here tonight at the peak, and 55,000. Wow, what a voice crack, dude. Screaming on stream actually has made my voice like start cracking a little bit. But still, 55,000 people have watched this stream before it's ended. We are entirely honored and entirely appreciative to each and every single one of y'all for watching this channel, enjoying this channel, enjoying the news that we cover, and always being here and making sure to support Ukraine, the Western world, and also us behind the scenes. We are greatly honored to know that y'all choose this to be y'all's channel each and every night to get y'all's news. And if y'all have enjoyed, make sure to subscribe, make sure to like, make sure to comment, and make sure to hit that like button. We have hit almost 3,100 likes right now, and if we could get that like number any higher, I would be all the more happier. We are so happy to run this stream for y'all tonight, and we will of course see y'all all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 24 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine. And so, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, and long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die.
And good night, folks, and thank you all for another great stream once again. It's been another great one. And with that, Slava Ukraine. Here I'm Slava. I almost forgot my whole statement there. Well, real quick, I almost forgot it. But anyways, thank you all once again, and we'll see you all tomorrow night at 10 p.m. Eastern. And also, if there's enough news to cover, maybe a short war summary midday tomorrow. But with that, thank you all once again, and good night.
Yes. The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.